Yeah, so welcome everyone to the launch of the Quantum Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission today. We've got a full long program. Now you will know that we've got 3 hours to get through. We're a little bit late, but we will crack on. Obviously, it's fairly tight in this room, so we will completely understand if you need to nip out. The loos are obviously, across the hallway, etc. So that's all understood. And of course, we hope that we'll get many questions from you. And of course, through our online audience, we also want Q&As coming through, and we will try and get to everyone's questions as much as we possibly can. And if we don't, we can obviously try later after the event to be able to answer questions either just after the event or certainly by email, etc. So with that, I just wanted to say we've got an unbelievable amount of support here today. You will have seen, I think all of you will have seen that in the Lancet article that was published just last night. There's a huge amount of support from the international scientific community for what we're launching the vision for today, which is incredible to see. I mean, we've got people from the US, from Hong Kong, from Singapore, from all quarters really lending their support. And these are, distinguished academic sort of scientists in their own right, policymakers, etc. So we're really, really pleased with the groundswell of support that we've already started to establish. Now, you will all know that this has come at a time, and before I start handing over, the reason why we're launching this is that, it's time to do this. We know we have a health crisis, and this is not just in the UK, this is around the world. We know we need some very, very different solutions to address this health crisis. A lot of us, here today, and certainly speaking today, we're all working out some of those radical, bold solutions, what they could look like. So we know that there are plans for, and the government is very, very committed to levelling up, and also the science and tech agenda. So we are trying to wrap up, what are a number of work streams that we've been working on actually for the past 3 years. And very pleased that Damien Green is here because, of course, a lot of these ideas started about 3 years ago with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, which, of course, Damien chairs. And many individuals I see in the audience today have also been involved in that journey. And so really what you're seeing is, I guess, the synthesis of a lot of the ideas that we've been sort of brewing in the background, the Open Life Data Framework, the Business for Health social venture, which we're going to be addressing in session 2, really coming together to really create the world testbed for health, which will lead the world, we think, in really focusing attention, policy, investment on health. The 80% that has nothing to do with NHS and hospitals and the care we get by doctors. It's everything to do with the wider determinants of our health, which are significant and really need to be addressed. So this is our, I guess, solution for how we might tackle that. And we need everyone involved. We need the general public. We need policymakers. We certainly need the money, the big funders, not just from public sector, but also the private sector. So we're all here on a journey. We really hope that all of you will support us because we really do need something that is very, very different. The old solutions ain't working. We all know that. So we need something different. So hopefully this will be the start. So I want to thank hugely Richard Chow and KCL for hosting the event. We're really grateful for your support. And of course, Richard has been involved right from day one. And of course, my colleagues, Nick Palmerini and Lynn Corner from Newcastle Innovation Centre for Aging, who we're working with as our sort of, behind this mission. There's a lot to do, but they will speak to all the incredible work that they're doing at the National Innovation Centre for Aging, which is really quite different and a very, very different view of what the world could look like in the future. So with that, because we need to crack on, I'm going to hand over to Damien Green.
Thanks very much, Tina. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, everyone. I am going to sit down to do this, although this is non-traditional, because I can see a camera there at about this level, and I'm conscious this is being live streamed elsewhere in the building, and I wouldn't want anyone to spend 5 minutes listening to me staring at my torso, which they might do otherwise. So Tina set me the task of setting the scene of the priorities of the UK government, which has been a 5-minute speech I've changed about 4 times in the last 3 months as the UK government has changed. So I will stick to first principles, which was the manifesto commitment made in 2019 to levelling up in terms of achieving a 5-year increase in healthy life expectancy by 2035, which I suspect felt a long way away when somebody wrote that in 2019, and now is rather less far away. And also at the same time, partly achieving that by reducing the health inequalities in the country. And one way and another, neither of those aims has had anything particularly useful done about them over the past few years, not entirely due to the government. Of course, we have had a once-in-a-century pandemic to deal with, and understandably, the very, very many essential and worthwhile elements that will go to a proper ill health prevention and therefore greater healthy longevity program have not just not happened, but obviously haven't been anywhere near the top of the agenda for any of the health ministers over that period, with, I suspect, the notable exception on my left here of Lord Bethell. But as things settle down politically, we now have a new government where that aspiration on healthy life expectancy can fit neatly into aspirations about making Britain a tech and scientific superpower, which we've seen under successive prime ministers. And at the same time, they will be seeing all the warning signals that we can see about that, first of all, that we are not making any progress on life expectancy, let alone healthy life expectancy, and also that the working age population in particular is becoming less healthy, and indeed is becoming so unhealthy that large numbers of them are of working age but are not working. We have the central economic paradox of having very low unemployment, but quite high levels of people receiving out of work benefits of working age. And this cannot continue for all sorts of reasons, for reasons of pressure on the National Health Service, but also reasons of making sure that the economy can function properly. There are innumerable bits of evidence. The Health Foundation's recent report showed that 200,000 older workers aged over 50 had left unemployment due to ill health since the start of the pandemic, and a lot of them are just not coming back. We've seen the Legatum Institute report that shows that the UK population is becoming increasingly unhealthy. So the net effect of that is extra demands on the NHS just at the time when that extra money is not there. And the IFS published a fascinating report showing that there are two distinct issues at stake: increasing levels of ill health among the older, non-working population, and increasing levels of inactivity among younger people leaving work due to health-related problems. So as one of the things that the APPG on longevity, that, as Tina said, we set up a few years ago, we seized on quite early on, which is that longevity is not just an issue for and about older people. It is about your whole lifespan, and that therefore, if you become a bit unhealthy in your 20s, 30s, or even as a child, then you are going to be the burden in old age, a burden not least on yourself and your family. And so actually dealing with that as early as possible, and in particular through people's working lives, is an absolutely essential way of making sure we have a population that is healthier for longer. And Andy Haldane has put the number on this, as there will be economists in the room and they want numbers. 1 extra year of longevity is worth £60 billion to the UK, or £1,000 roughly per person, which is a good round number that we can all seize on. And of course, it is the healthy longevity that we need. So that's the part. I'm in the luxurious position of a politician, unusually, of all I have to do is set out the problems and let other people set out the solutions there. So that's a tremendous luxury. And I can't think of anyone to give us, no doubt, all the solutions to this than Lord Bethell. James Bethell was an inspirational health minister, absolutely got seized of this issue, and was so seized of it that he has carried on after his period in office. So James, you are very welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to stand up because I am incapable of sitting down and talking at the same time in this area. Can I start by thanking Tina for organising this remarkable event? You are the policy astronaut who is guiding this rocket ship into the policy space, and you're doing an amazing job of boosting it all. And can I thank my friend Damien, who really kicked off this whole process that's led to us being here as chair of the APPG on longevity, with the report in 2020, Health of the Nation, a strategy for healthier lives. And with people like John Godfrey, who's here, Lord Filkin, who isn't here, Damien set the policy ball rolling and the movement mobilised, and we're here today. And can I also thank very much indeed Professor Lynn Corner and Nick Parmini from the National Innovation Centre for driving this agenda. It's really, this event is going to be a real highlight of Longevity Week. I'm really proud to be here. Now, as Damien rightly pointed out, the commitment for 5 extra healthy, independent years of life and the commitment to narrow the gap between the richest and the poorest by 2035 has been in not only government policy, but the Tory manifesto for literally decades. And we are, I mean, a lot has changed on a government by government basis, but I think that's still very much on the books. But if we look at how we're delivering on the recommendations in Damien's original report, we might worry that we are going backwards rather than forwards in some important respects. The report asked that the Prime Minister was a national champion for improving our health. But instead, we've had quite a lot of discussion about the nanny state and civil rights, and the ambition for a healthier nation has become confused. The report called for a government commitment to reduce smoking, obesity, excess alcohol, and increase physical activity by 2035 with clear action plans. And there are plans, and I do pay tribute to all those who are working in this sphere. But the obesity strategy has been more or less shelved. The health disparities white paper never saw the light of day. The Khan review is in the icebox, and participation rates on sport and longevity for some important demographics are falling whilst BMIs are rising. The report called on the NHS to do more to prevent ill health and to manage its demand. It currently spends, as we know, less than 5% of its budget on prevention, and that should be something more like 15% by 2030. But instead, we read reports that both UXA and OHID may be hit by lower funding. And instead of prioritising 5 more years, DHSC is very much focused on ABCD. And the system is shutting down health checks, really important preventative measure, and it's failing to scale genomics quickly enough. Inclisiran, a really important project that some of you may know about, got more or less blocked by NICE, and we failed to buy enough flu vaccine this year. These are really basic failures in our commitment to the prevention agenda. Now, having had the biggest health crisis this country has faced for more than a century, you'd rather hope that we'd be standing here talking about policy breakthroughs, diagnostic infrastructure builds, behavioural revolutions and the like. But history, I'm afraid to say, teaches us that the reverse often happens. History teaches us that pandemics often lead to war, to inflation, and to a psychological refusal to learn the lessons from the pandemic. And I remember Chris Whitty, the CMO, when he gave us his little sort of early briefing on pandemics back in January 2020. He made exactly this point. Don't expect to be cheered at the end of the pandemic. People just won't want to think about it. So that is the frustrating truth, that the prevention agenda is a bit on the back foot right now. But that is why this launch today of the Quantum Health Longevity Innovation Mission could not be better timed and more important. Because for all of the frustration we feel, the mission is a ray of light that focuses on the massive opportunity we have in front of us. It's an opportunity not just for tinkering around and marginal changes, but for a quantum leap forward in the spiritual, material and physical prosperity of our people. It's an opportunity to harness the technological revolution and the use of data to bring about healthier, longer lives for everyone. And let me please point out 3 areas that I feel are particularly encouraging. Firstly is in the area of research. There are, as we speak, remarkable breakthroughs in diagnostics, in AI, in vaccines, robotics, quantum computing, in genomics, in so many of the outer borders of science that we've got a real momentum for change. The sector is absolutely fizzing with opportunities. Now, I saw this for myself when I was Innovations Minister during the pandemic. I saw treatments, diagnostics, vaccines coming out of our scientific base that had lurked there for some time and saw the light of day when we really needed them. And the results were that we saved millions of lives around the world. And I can bear testimony to the fact that there is a huge pipeline of development behind the ones that we saw in the pandemic. We're living in an age of biology, and in the language of Silicon Valley, there's a really impressive hockey stick of advance going ahead of us. Secondly, these opportunities are being financed by a wall of money from the private sector. UK funds are very important, but there's a global investment shift towards life sciences and the longevity research that's going to deliver a massive financial and societal return on investment. And it's really pleasing to see the business world is putting health into the ESG agenda. And can I please can I welcome the many corporates and business people who are here today? And can I pay particular tribute to the collaboration with the CBI on the Workforce Health Index, which we're going to talk about a bit more longer. And can I single out my good friend John Godfrey here, who has done so much to mobilise and motivate the business community behind this important agenda. Thirdly and lastly, public investment is switching towards life sciences, behavioural changes and environmental investments in a way that will drive longevity. The £22 billion settlement that the life science research community got out of the Treasury was an outstanding vote of confidence by the UK government. And at COP last week, we saw UK ministers commit to green investments that will have a profound health dividend. So overall, I think that the Health Longevity Innovation Mission can be a really powerful catalyst for bringing together these exciting dynamics. I think it's going to have a huge impact in the worlds of business, finance, science and policy. But I do want to call on everyone in this room to put their shoulder to the wheel, because we can only succeed in this mission if the passion for this agenda moves beyond the evangelists and pioneers amongst us. And that's going to require change in the national dialogue on health. And here, can I please share an important readout that Damien very kindly teed up for me. We fixate optimistically about the shiny future for healthy longevity, but we need to have some sympathy for our national and local leaders. For decades, they have expressed British health policy in terms of waiting lists as a surrogate for customer service, hospital building as a surrogate for infrastructure build, and the numbers of nurses as a commitment to the workforce. Now, that focus is really important. We all want a healthcare operation that is optimized, but it's really inconsequential on the impact on long life. And it creates an absolutely disastrous political cul-de-sac. Our political leaders are like Tantalus, which you may remember is the Greek mythological figure who was made to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree with low branches, and the fruit were constantly dipping towards him, and he could never quite reach it. And so our political leaders are with waiting lists and new hospitals. They can never quite win because the system is broke. Now, I made many of these commitments on the election trail myself, driving up and down the country in 2019. And I know that for many people on the doorstep, they felt very committed to. Commitment to the NHS was our #2 policy headline point in the election after Brexit. But any conversation about improving the health of the nation has deteriorated recently into an argument about civil liberties and the role of the nanny state. We need desperately a reboot. I want to see a world where voters are focused on prevention and outcomes, not on sickness and treatments. Instead of waiting lists in hospitals, voters should be asking, where was the latest full panel vaccines for my children so that they're shielded against common diseases? Where's the genomic testing for my baby that will risk score their future health and optimize their treatments? Where's the cognitive testing for my parents so that they can get the earliest and most effective interventions against dementia? Where's my health check? Because I'm in Cancer Sniper Alley, and I speak personally here, and I want pre-treatment for anything that might come my way. That's what the modern healthcare narrative should be. And it shouldn't be just limited to medical prevention. We should also be looking at the environment. When is the air in my neighborhood going to get better? When is my employer going to contribute properly to my mental health support? And we should be looking at society as well and make the case for spiritual renewal. When are we going to clear up childhood abuse so we reduce the impact of severe trauma, or reduce family breakups and knit more cohesive communities? Now, there is a precedent for this. During the pandemic, public attention switched from concerns about ICU capacity to the rollout of the vaccine. And I speak with some feeling about this because I was responsible for test and trace and for medicines, and I didn't get a lot of voter interest in either of those areas. But the government did get an enormous amount of credit for preventing severe disease and death from the vaccine. And my colleague, Nadeem Zahawi, built an entirely successful political career out of that, whereas delivering 3 billion COVID tests didn't really work out very well for me. Now, so I think that for the mission, acting as a catalyst for this political inflection point can be one of the most important things it does. The mission can give confidence to our people and to our government that the technologies and policies that prevent disease can deliver a meaningful impact on the health of the nation. It's a blueprint for accelerating healthy longevity. Its blueprint for accelerating healthy longevity can articulate a post-nanny state agenda for how we can collectively ensure all citizens have the best possible chances for a healthier, happier, and more productive life. That's why I welcome the focus on the longevity economy and how we can bring investors to the party, because nothing can happen without their support. My friends, by way of winding up, can I say I welcome the launch of this exciting initiative because I believe it really can be a catalyst for a revolution. If there are any donors in the room or listening in on the internet, could you please contribute generously to the fighting fund that Tina is managing, because this mission is incredibly important. And I'm looking forward very much indeed to the panels being run this afternoon for a really interesting discussion of these points. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, James. That was brilliant and genuinely inspirational. It's good to hear the passion, because it's going to be really important that, as you say, there are evangelists that we will continue to need, even when the rest of the world has not only agreed with us, but also stumped up to pay for it as well, which I hope is going to be one of the effects of today. We will now move on, joining James on a panel. We have 3 other speakers, Professor Lynn Corner from the National Innovation Centre for Ages, Professor Lynn Cox, you have to be called Lynn to be an expert in this field, Head of Lab of Aging and Cell Senescence at Oxford, and joining us remotely, I hope, Professor Nia Barzilai, the Director of the Institute for Aging Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So while we fix up the lines, perhaps Lynn's in various order. We'll start on the left and work through. If you could do 2 or 3 minutes explaining your perspective on this.
Hello, everybody. It's fabulous to be here, and thank you all for joining us in person and to those online. So I'm Lynn Corner. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the UK's National Innovation Centre for Ageing, and embedded in our organisation is a very large citizen organisation of ordinary people who really want to see this happen, called Voice. And I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. But first of all, talking a little bit about why we put investing in brain capital at the centre of this mission. What do we mean by brain capital? Well, Brain capital encompasses everything from the skills that we need to live our daily lives, but also the prevention of some of the most common illnesses such as anxiety, depression, as well as dementia, which is something that remains high in the condition that everybody most fears. And actually, you know, it costs around about 2.5 trillion to 8.5 trillion a year in lost productivity and lost billions in terms of care costs. So brain capital is absolutely fundamental to this agenda. We also put it at the centre because of the impact, as James outlined, in terms of COVID, in terms of loneliness, in terms of isolation. People at the moment are experiencing great financial insecurity, and that has a sustained impact on people's mental health. And it's just so important that that's absolutely central to any healthy longevity innovation mission. But then, you know, we mentioned about productivity and the importance for economic growth of this agenda and the importance to invest early and plan ahead. And we know that, you know, if we can actually put centre stage investing in brain health, which we also mean brain skills, resilience, adaptability, hope, optimism, all of those terms which have often been sort of dismissed as soft skills, when actually they are fundamental to coherent societies. They're fundamental to employers in terms of building really strong employees with robust resilience in order to kind of deal with the future shocks that come. And we had a conversation earlier about carers, and that is fundamentally under that umbrella. So Voice is about this opportunity that we have here to really power citizens. Citizens are increasingly frustrated, as James so ably outlined, that we know so much. We have so much evidence, we have so much data, but we are wasting it. We're not using it. And so part of this innovation mission is very much about how we can join things up and actually start to really kind of leverage that amazing capacity, the talent that we have in employees, in scientists, in businesses, and ordinary members of the public to really understand that. And we've used the term democratizing healthy longevity, which is about democratizing access to all of this. Because although we talk about prevention, there isn't, seems to us, a model for it. From a citizen point of view, from the National Innovation Centre for Ageing, we see hundreds of businesses coming through. Fantastic businesses, smart startups, really, really strong businesses that have every opportunity to be scaled up, but they can't make money. They can't actually access the market because we haven't yet thought about how we can actually put in place a business model for that. And that's a really fundamental part of this. We also know that locked-in citizens, as James again sort of highlighted, is so much imagination and talent. And actually, part of what we do in the Innovation Centre for Ageing, along with Tina and Voice, is actually put that capability centre stage. These are people who are co-innovators. They have the ideas, they have as much talent and insight as kind of businesses and so on. And if we can actually join that up, what is possible in terms of taking people on the journey with us for really understanding what is needed, what they can do in their lives and what they need to really kind of make the most of this amazing opportunity around healthy longevity. And the other part about brain capital is making sure that the wider environment is right for it. And, you know, Lynn and I, we're going to talk a little bit this afternoon about the exposome and how actually this isn't just about health. This is about how the environment can support healthier, longer lives, how we can understand how our cities, how our wider infrastructure can really, really contribute to really building and nurturing this brain capital across the life course. And the final point I'd make about that is that about 15 years ago, we set up Voice. It's a well-established organisation. We now operate in about 7 different countries, but all across the UK. And it started from a Government Office for Foresight report on the need to invest in mental capital. And like all, as you'd hope, a Foresight report was ahead of its time. But also, have we really acted on the recommendations of that report? And time again, we see reports coming out, the same recommendations over and over again, worthy recommendations, really valid and really strong recommendations. But again, are we really kind of mobilizing behind that? And can we really take a quantum leap to really kind of invest in where is needed to make sure that we're putting this agenda around prevention first and center stage? And that Foresight report, it covered the need for education. It covered the need to start early. So this agenda, as we in the National Innovation Centre know, it's not about older people. This is about investing at the earliest stages in life in foundational skills and education and early childhood to really make sure that people can accrue the best possibility. It's about making sure that people have financial wellness, financial resilience, that they have through life learning to reskill. If we're going to have to live, we're going to have this amazing opportunity to live for 100 plus years. We have to make sure that we are planning all of our structures and all of our infrastructure to enable that. Whereas still in the UK, we have a situation where most of the education is under 18. We are, as James said, we've seen cuts in major areas. So this concept of brain capital, of healthy people, healthy planet, how we can bring it together is fundamentally central to the mission. And I would just like to echo what James said in terms of what excites us about this mission is that we have got so much talent, so much capability in citizens, in our universities, in our businesses, and we can make the step change. But we do need to be bold, we do need to be radical and think differently about that investment because, as Tina said, the old ways ain't working, and it is now time for a real step change. Putting citizens and their brain capital is ripe for investment.
Thank you very much. Lynn.
Okay, thanks. Now, that's a very hard act to follow, Lynn, but thank you. So I'm a biogerontologist at Oxford, and my lab studies all the things that happen to us as we get old that drive age-related diseases. I've worked with Tina and Damien and various others on the APPG for longevity, and also I co-direct the new UK Aging Network. So we're always looking for partners and new members, so please join. And as from next week, I'm going to be Programme Director of a new Welcome Leap programme on multimorbidity and healthy longevity. So again, watch out for that. There'll be a new call for ageing research coming up soon. So I'm going to start with the bad news. We all know that ageing for most people is associated with very poor health. There are currently around 10 million people in the UK living with arthritis, 7.6 million with cardiovascular disease, 5 million with chronic kidney disease. A lot of people are living with very serious health, poor health. And we know also that the risk of getting these chronic, horrible diseases rises exponentially with age. So aging at the moment is associated with disease. And it's hugely expensive. It's expensive in terms of quality of life for the individual and their families, and it's expensive for society. So frailty alone costs on approximately £5.6 billion a year. This leads to unplanned hospital admissions. The NHS is struggling under the strain of unplanned activity, bed blocking, all those things that we know are making it creak around the edges and potentially going to fall over the next few years. Dementia on its own is estimated to cost about 25 billion in care, health and care costs. This is an incredibly expensive thing to get wrong, and we've been getting it wrong for an awful long time. But it doesn't have to be the case. We know that aging is malleable. We know that age-related diseases don't have to happen. I mean, Nia, who's online, has a study on supercentenarians, people who live incredibly healthily and happily into their 110s. We know that biology can be modified, and we know that age-related diseases don't have to happen. But in order to do this, we need a whole-of-life course approach. So Lynn has talked about starting very early on. For those of you at the Longevity Forum this morning, starts in utero and potentially preconception. All these life course exposures impact on our health. So we need a whole-of-life course approach. We need to get away from the attitude that the healthcare system, the NHS, is there to deal reactively with illness. We need it to deal proactively with health promotion. It's a no-brainer to me that this is so cost effective, and yet it's currently not happening. But importantly, what we also need to do is acknowledge that there is a vast sector of our population, and when you look at the people who are vulnerable to COVID, it's about a third of our population with chronic diseases that make them very susceptible to harm. And we need to get effective treatment options out for those. So this whole of life course approach includes education, housing, environment, but also better therapeutics for people already suffering with age-related diseases. And the reason I'm optimistic, and part of this mission and why it's here and now, is that there's been a massive explosion in findings from aging biology research leading to identification of hallmarks of aging. So we know that there are certain key things that we can now address therapeutically. We can understand the biology that leads to age-related diseases. We know that those hallmarks map to diseases, and we can identify new treatments based on that. There's also been a sea change in technologies over the past couple of decades. So I'm a biologist, so I'm a little bit biased maybe, but genome editing, sequencing of the genome and the proteome, high resolution imaging, 3D organ cultures, systems biology, and being able to model the complexity of biology using omics and AI technologies. All of these things have allowed us to address aging biology in a totally different way. And those studies have now led to new therapeutics being developed. So we've got stem cell therapies in the offing, regenerative technologies. We know that nutrient sensing pathways are important. So Nia's going to talk about the TAME trial and metformin. There are loads of other things out there. There's drugs like rapamycin and mTOR inhibitors that are looking extremely promising, and we're involved in clinical trials for those. And then one of the key hallmarks of aging is senescence, where our normal cells go wrong. They go rogue over time, pretty much like a cancer is made up of normal cells that have gone bad. We treat cancer by getting rid of those cells. We can now treat aging by modifying or removing the harmful senescent cells. And these therapeutics, they've got proven efficacy in experimental systems, and they are now moving through to clinical trials, some with very promising results, moving from phase 1 to phase 2 clinical trials based on efficacy. So it's looking incredibly promising. And to be honest, there's no reason why we're not doing it. One extra healthy year is worth 60 billion to the UK economy. What's the black hole in our budget at the moment? If we actually do this right, then we can solve a lot of our financial and fiscal worries by improving health. So preventative intervention, or intervening so early on before disease becomes manifest, to me seems like the most sensible way to go, so that we change the narrative from gradual inevitable decline with age to one of maintenance of health throughout the life course. So the time is now. I mean, we absolutely have to do it. It's morally unacceptable to let that many people suffer. We need to do it because we can't afford not to, and we can do it because of the new technologies. So essentially, that's me.
Thank you very much. It's very good to have a dose of unalloyed optimism and a sense of the future. Also something that would appeal to the Treasury, and any politician will say that's really important. The final member of our panelists, Professor Nia Barzilai, who's been, I hope, listening to us online. He nods enthusiastically. Good. Professor Barzilai, over to you. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm actually more optimistic than Lynn. I think she. By the way, I hear echo. Do you hear echo? Oh, it's better now. So I'm here in New York. Good morning from New York, and so I'm behind you, or you're ahead of time. You're ahead of time in what you're doing, because the United States will get it right, but it's a very big ship that's hard to turn. And I think what Tina is demonstrating, that with special units, with special forces, with commando units, you can achieve more and get more done. And I'm just so excited of how she's putting those things in the agenda. So thank you, Tina and her troop. And I really want to double down on what Lynn just told you, is that aging can be targeted, and age-related diseases can be delayed, and aging can be even stopped and reversed in certain instances, which Lynn is looking at one of them. But I want to make I want to make 2 points. The first is, I just want to give you an example. And this example is very relevant to the UK, because I'm talking on a drug that's called metformin, that is used for diabetes. And this is what happened. In the UK, there was a study that included 180,000 people. And there were several groups, but the study started by looking at patients who received either metformin or sulfonylurea, it's another anti-diabetic drug, and see what happened 5 years later to their mortality. And the people on metformin had half the mortality. And we knew they'll have half of the mortality because metformin is really something that delays aging. It affects all the hallmarks of aging. And by the way, the glucose level of those with metformin was worse than those with the sulfonylurea. It has nothing to do with diabetes. But something even more important happened. There was a very good control group without diabetes, matching for their physicians and the pharmacies and other things. And the people who didn't have diabetes had more mortality than the people on metformin. So metformin had, the people on metformin had diabetes, they were more obese, they were more sick too, but they died less. And metformin is not only on mortality, studies have shown that it prevents variety of age-related disease and conditions. And what I'm leading now is something that's called the TAME trial, or Targeting Aging with Metformin. And the main mission of this study is to show that variety of age-related disease can be moved or delayed. And for the FDA, that everybody looks to, you know, the UK is not going to start doing those studies, because in this sense, it's always America first. The FDA has to do first, then everybody gets in line. So we're going to show the FDA that aging actually is malleable, and that with a very cheap generic study, we can get 1 or 2 years of or more of extended health span with lots of economical benefits. The second point I just want to make quickly is, because I was supposed to talk about international efforts, and I'm executive in the Longevity Biotech Association. There's $40 billion investment in aging, in longevity biotechnology. And we have an association that actually centers in the UK. We're going to have a meeting later on in a couple of hours. Jim Mellon is one of the founders of this association. And I think it's part of the wave. Some of what will happen is there'll be such an economy and such progress in biotechnology that will also make the politician notice better. Another thing that happened, and I'm executive on that too, is there's a healthy longevity. Okay, now 2 words that are repeating today: healthy longevity medicine society, because there's a lot of longevity doctors that are also treating and preventing diseases and improving health span in their patients, but we want to standardize it and have it part of medicine so we can maximize the health right now. So I'll stop here. Thank you for this opportunity.
Question and answer session, and because I have to go back to the world's most unhealthy workplace, I will hand over to Tina. But thank you all personally to all our speakers so far. Tina.
Thank you so much, Damien, and thank you so much for your support and being here today, Damien. Thank you. So Nir, do hold on the line for a bit. We're going to have a few questions, and I hope now I've got a few sort of planted questions, so to speak, just to make sure we get the discussion going in the right direction. But I hope I don't see any Q&As, by the way, coming through the Q&A channel, but I know there's some people in the audience who would like to ask a question, so I will come to you in a second. So I'm just going to kick off. And also while Nir is here as well, why do you think the UK is in a good position to lead this mission in the world? Who would like to start first?
I can start. I think one of the reasons that I think we are in a great position is that we have fantastic universities, we have fantastic science. We have fantastic science, we have fantastic businesses. And we've got a real long history of innovation. And I think in terms of, that is what this needs. It needs the ability to think differently, to not just go down the same old, but to have a radical shift and a radical think about how we utilize data and how we can really kind of use the new technologies that are coming through in AI, in quantum, but also in kind of just, general data analysis of just that step forward that we can make. We also have a long history as well, of a long history of innovation of actually accruing large data sets. We've got, we have got the NHS in terms of the longitudinal studies, but we've got enormous data, enormous insights locked in all sorts of projects in businesses. And key to this mission is how we can really collaborate, break down the existing silos of working very separately, and really come together to say, how do we collaborate to unlock the insights that is in all that data, in all our organizations, and work differently and smartly to leverage that so that citizens benefit. Because as Lynn said, it is almost a moral obligation as well as a massive investment opportunity to unlock that. And that's a call to everything from early investment in through life, but we are in a brilliant position. And the final thing I would say is that politically, voters are ready for this, citizens are ready for that. There is increasing frustration and irritation amongst the people I work with that we know so much, and if you know, why not? Why don't I have access to these amazing insights that could really help me, help my family, whether it be an older member or a younger member? So I think both from a citizen-led innovation framework, but also from all the amazing talent that we have here working within the UK, but also internationally, I think this is a brilliant place to really unlock that potential for science innovation, for healthy longevity, for people here, but also everywhere.
I'm going to go next very briefly. Thank you. Listen, those were exactly the same three that I had in my mind. So I'm kind of a bit frustrated. So let me just build on them very, very briefly. That's right. We have remarkable science and research in this country. And I know, having hosted global conventions on healthcare in the UK, how much that's regarded all around the world. But we are terrible at scaling that research into really impactful into big companies and into impactful. We let other people do that. So I think one of the objectives for the mission is to try and bring in the finance and the managerial skills to be able to do that. Secondly, on the NHS, other health ministers envy our single platform approach to healthcare. It should be exactly the right model for delivering population health and the kind of interventions that promote longer life. But the data is not lined up, and the priorities are around operational optimization rather than about prevention. So that needs to be addressed. And then in terms of the public, I agree. I think that the public, as I said, I hope reasonably clearly, are interested in trying to get their children, themselves and their parents living longer. But the politicians are massively off the pace. We need to reassure politicians that there are answers in this space that won't leave them hopelessly exposed if they start piling into them.
So I'm going to hand over to Lynn in a second, but I just wanted to point out one of the big ideas that we're really trying to make happen in this innovation mission is to make it much easier for all of our fantastic innovators and scientists to do more and to scale up and to commercialize their product and service. It is absolutely hell, for so many startups working, trying to get access to data, in NHS and doing trials, et cetera, And one of the big things that we've been working on, which got a lot of support last year with the Open Life Data Framework, is to make it easier to share public sector, private sector data, for example, to really unearth and unlock the innovation that George Freeman has been talking about, the innovation economy. Well, we need the right environment, we need the right data sharing agreements, the right infrastructure, we need the business models that support it. So it's a whole system approach that we need to really take on this. But we have the technology, we have it, and we've got so many other things that we can use to put into the mix. So over to you, Lynn, and then I'll hand over to you.
There's not a lot left to be said after all of that, but one thing that hasn't been touched on is regulation. Now, historically, it's been quite slow to get things into clinical trials. Since COVID, there was obviously a change in the regulatory environment to try and expedite drugs going into people. So a lighter touch regulation. MHRA is starting to see that it's possible to change the way we do trials without harming people, and also in terms of what we can now do with trials. So Nir's talking about the TAME trial. Doing trials in aging is historically almost impossible because you have to wait sort of like 50 years for people to die. No one's going to fund that sort of trial. But if we have biomarkers or proxy endpoints that can allow regulators to say, OK, this is representative of the disease state, even though it's not the disease, we can move forwards. And these sorts of things are now coming on board. So the fact that surrogate endpoints, things like antibody levels, were accepted for the trials of the vaccines, rather than it's going to protect you from COVID, you've got a very high level of neutralizing antibodies, was an acceptable surrogate marker. So that sort of mindset change from the pandemic, it was horrible, but there's some really good stuff that's come out biomedically from the pandemic, which is changing the regulatory environment and changing the thought process in terms of what is going to be permitted for monitoring during the course of clinical trials.
So thank you, Lynn. You mentioned aging biomarkers, and I know Nir will pick up on that. So really, again, the big hope here is that we will literally be poised to create the largest world-leading aging biomarker bank, and an atlas for geroprotective interventions, etc. These are all the big ideas that are spoken about in the Lancet article. But so Nir, it'd be really helpful to get your view on, you know, the challenges, but also you've been so successful getting the FDA to listen to you. And where do you think we can take that experience into the UK context, where we do have certain advantages, but we do need to do more? You know, you're an evangelist. You know, what tricks and tips can you offer us to really sort of take charge and lead the agenda here with our international collaborators such as yourselves?
Well, first of all, so I should start by saying why the UK. I'll tell you, the United States is number 35 in the world and declining in longevity. UK is, what is it, Tina? 5 or 10 or top 10? What I'm really saying is your healthcare is much more easy. It's going to be much easier to implement in your healthcare. I should warn. I should warn from one thing, and that's where the politicians are going to get to us. Let's say everybody accepts that it makes sense, economical sense, and sense for the individual to target aging. And let's say all the hospitals are now instructed that 50% of their budget is going to go to prevention rather than 3% of their budget. Well, there's going to be a point where you need an investment, because in the first year, you still need 97% of the budget to go to the hospital because people are still going to get diseases. So you need a little bit leeway and investment in order to get to the point where it's all prevention and the healthcare benefits are really, really great. So this is the challenge that I think the politician will come up and say, hey, where we take the budget to implement it.
I hand over to James, put him on the spot a bit. So what can we do?
That's absolutely the killer question. I completely agree. We have a stock of people who are poorly. We clearly have to treat them, but the flow is becoming overwhelming, and unfortunately, the money is all being focused on the stock rather than the flow. So there'll need to be at some point some double running, and I say that at a moment when clearly public finances are under huge pressure indeed. That's where I think the mission can help, because it's this question of confidence. In the past, public health messages have promised a lot of delivery, but really haven't come through for policy, for ministers and for governments. They feel that money that they have put into public health hasn't given the return on capital that they were promised. There's been a technological change, which we just heard about, that I think is changing that. And there is a mindset change that we cannot continue on this broken model that we've got at the moment. Finance needs to come in from a variety of places, not just from the taxpayer, but from private investors, from business themselves, much in the same way the answers to climate change are coming from multifarious routes. this question of getting over a confidence threshold that new technologies, new policies work, I think is one of the most fundamental things we can do right now.
Thank you, James. I'm going to. There's a couple of questions. There's one on the Q&A, but I'm just going to go to Chris, who's been waiting very patiently. Chris, what would you like to say?
Firstly, thank you, Lynn, for raising, as I'm one of the 5.9 that live with chronic kidney. Sorry. Thank you, Lynn, for raising it. As I'm one of the 5.9 that live with chronic kidney disease. Firstly, shouldn't we bring in a whole life care strategy to ensure that everyone has support in times of need instead of the bits and pieces we've got already? And I think James mentioned employee health. As Tina knows and Lynn knows, I've been working 13 years campaigning for paid carers leave. Instead of looking at a cost, shouldn't we be looking at the beneficial side instead of the expenditure side? And then that way there'll be more employee longevity in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent question. I'm going to hand to Lynn first.
This Lynn and then that maybe. So, Chris, absolutely brilliant. And your whole of life care strategy, absolutely. I mean, with the APPG for a long time, we were banging on about having what we were going to call the Little Red Book, but then we thought that maybe that has been overused elsewhere. But anyone who's had children has a red book. And for the first 5 years or, well, first 18 years of life, you plot their growth, you plot their vaccinations. The parents actually have something that they take to the clinic every time, and you've got a record of your health. Once you get old, you've got records in various different bits of the hospital. Your cardiovascular physician has no idea what's happening with the kidneys. It's not joined up. And what we want is a silver book, maybe, where you have all your health records that are putting patients in control of their own health. So they're the best advocates. And I think there's this paternalistic approach in medicine where doctor knows best. And I think we're starting to overcome that. Patients know best. I live with a chronic disabling condition. I know way more about it than most of my physicians. And fortunately, I've got a nice relationship with them, so they're prepared to take that on board. But I think it's so important that we all take charge of our own health. And you don't need a degree to do that. You just need the lived experience.
Lynn, I'm so glad you mentioned the Red Book for Life, because the digital Red Book for Life is one of the use cases that we looked at in the Open Life Data Framework. Why it would take care of so much, it would engage people in their health. And so that's one of the areas. And we also have, and I'm going to put James on the spot here a little bit, we have the COVID app and the NHS app that are on all of our phones. If we don't make use of that app for wellness and prevention, it's such a missed opportunity. I mean, it's crazy. What do you say to that?
I feel very passionately about this. I was the data minister, and we lent in really hard over the pandemic, and we massively increased the amount of data sharing and consumer engagement. The number of NHS app sign-ups were 300,000 before the pandemic. It's now more like 33 million, and people are booking their appointments, and they are taking photos of blemishes on their skin and sending them into the doctor, and they are recording their children's health on it. But in no way have we got a centralized record keeping across the nation, in particular in primary care, where Tina, you're absolutely right. There are these little pools of information. It's very, very difficult to share them. It's fundamental that we should overcome that. Now, people like Tim Ferriss at the NHS is really working hard. Some of you may have seen the contract awarded to Palantir. That's a step in the right direction. It is, though, utterly heartbreaking that a nation that has single-payer NHS like Britain has stumbled in the wrong direction by taking a subsidiarity principle to data rather than a patient-first. And we couldn't do better than to campaign on this point to try and take this agenda forward, I think.
We'll do that with you, James. And I've got a question.
Can I give just a fast example, because the person who asked the question said he has a chronic renal disease. So there is an example of gerotherapeutic, right? We're talking metformin and others are gerotherapeutics. They attack the biology of aging. And there are drugs that are called SGLT2 inhibitors, and I wouldn't know what they're called in the UK, but they showed to prevent deterioration of kidney function by more than 30%, and also at the same time prevent heart disease and all causes of mortality. Just to tell you, we could implement that and start preventing the deterioration and prevent kidney disease, heart disease, and everything if we're using those drugs.
I've got a question that's come through on the Q&A, which I'm going to ask Lynn Corner to answer, because it's right up her street. So the question is, we can all discuss strategy to keep people fitter for longer, but we need a public movement for health with local leadership at the heart. How can we create common cause innovation from local agencies, business and third sector?
It's an excellent question. And I think that's at the heart of the mission, is a little less conversation, a little more kind of, sort of real kind of activity. But certainly this has got to be embraced by ordinary people. This has got to be not about doing things to people, but about accepting that although our NHS is our greatest asset in many respects, we are talking about the 80% that lies outside it. And we are talking about just at ordinary community level, people's everyday lives, how they live their life, what they enjoy doing, their leisure, their activity, that as actually before they become patients as well. And so actually that local community level, how we can actually mobilize people to really feel part of this. And that actually, as I said at the start, we talk about the experts in business and the experts in our institutions and, our fine politicians, but, equally ordinary people have got as much lived experience. They've got an enormous amount of knowledge, capability and capacity. And if we can mobilize that through organizations like Voice, but working collectively in partnership with other agencies, how much more is possible? And that is reason to be optimistic, because if we can really power people to have access to the information and really interpret and use the data that's at their disposal, then how much more is possible? And I think that's, again, at the heart of this mission, is that hope and optimism that we can really, really make that difference.
Any other comments on creating a public movement? Nir, perhaps you can. There's quite a lot of things happening in the US now. I mean, Lifespan have been very active with their science crowdfunding movement. We've obviously got all these various alliances popping up to put it more higher up on the policy agenda. Where do you see the public movement sort of happening in the US?
Well, as I mentioned before, there is a wave, and the wave is everywhere. It's on lobbying front, it's on the biotech front, the medical front. So there's definitely a wave. Now, from a science perspective, there are two approaches. They are the moonshot approaches. There is a new company called Altos that invests $3 billion basically in solving the problem of aging. Moonshots take time. And sometimes, we went to the moon, but nothing really happened after that. So we don't know what's going to happen, but it's a good investment. And on the other hand, their investment, like a new fund from Saudi that's called Evolution, combination of heaven and evolution, that are actually trickling the money down for basic research. As the scientific director of the American Federation of Aging Research, we just asked to review grants, and we have almost $9 million to give. As you said, there are the impetus grants, there are the foresight grants. So there's a lot of activity to assure that we have pipeline for the best mechanisms and drugs development to stop aging as much as we can, and to implement it as fast as possible through all political and other challenges.
Much, Nir. I know we're coming close to the end of the session, but I'm going to take one more question from the audience. I'm right here.
Thank you, Naomi Glover, Applied Neuroscience Association, and we're looking at ways that we can help translate that research as quickly as possible to practice, but in an ethical way. What we're seeing is things like women, for example, are at twice as much risk of Alzheimer's and dementia, but only 30% of people think that they have any way of reducing their risk of dementia. So there's this huge education issue. What can we do to help accelerate that research into practice, but ethically?
Very, very good question. Accelerating research into practice and the need for education. I'm going to hand over to Lynn. I know she's passionate about the subject. Or Lynn Cox.
Yeah, I think we both are. So one of the things of the new UK Aging Networks is to join everybody together, to break down the silos, to enhance research into policy and practice. And one of the things that we're aiming to do is produce training materials. At the moment, we're looking at training materials for clinicians because they don't get anything in geroscience. So actually training up people who are on the wards dealing with dementia, going, actually, there are new things that you can be thinking about. But we also have a major theme of public engagement. And it's really, really important that we don't sit in our ivory towers as scientists and know a lot of stuff and publish in specialist journals. We need to get the message out there. And I do a lot of U3A work, and every time I give a talk to U3A, everyone's go, oh, can I have some of it? So people want to know, and it's up to people like us who know to go out there and sell the story. We can't just expect other people to do it. If we have the knowledge, we have to share that knowledge. And I think it's something that everybody who has public funding at least has the duty to go and do. It used to be one of those things you put on your CV, the public understanding science. And I got mocked at spending too much time on it at work because it meant that I wasn't publishing in Cell and Nature. I think it's absolutely fundamental that everybody has a right to know what's going on, and therefore we generate a grassroots movement that can pressure politicians. If it's a doorstep thing during campaigning, then I think that's when people take notice. Is that correct? You said Brexit and health. Seriously, I mean, get the politicians wanting to get re-elected elected on a basis of we are going to do something that's going to benefit you, but the population know about it. We were doing some stuff with a radio producer. I mean, I've got a lovely article in The Sun, that great learned journal. And there's all sorts of avenues that scientists can use to get the message out there, and we're not using it enough. So get in touch with your Science Media Centre, go out there, do public stuff, and really engage with the public.
Lynn and I were taking actually the subject of this into the schools 3 years ago, which is quite something. James, you wanted to say final word?
I mean, just to endorse that point, yes, I think that we need to mobilise voters. That's how you change things. I fear that voters will only engage when the current system falls over even further than this. That is not a constructive voter movement. What is more exciting is the idea that voters up and down the country will see the opportunity for economic growth, for societal improvement, from longevity, from better health, and lean into our politicians to try and improve this in a positive way. And that's very much what I think this mission can help do.
Quick comment, Lynn, before we close?
Yeah, no, I think to just endorse that, and also to remember that the people in the poorest health are not necessarily engaging with the institutions that we're mentioning, and that is the nub. They're not in work, and so we need to kind of make sure that we also think radically about how we can actually engage the people in the most need, who have got the most to gain from this agenda. And so start early, plan ahead, and let's not just do same old, same old. Let's not just repeat and grow the existing institutions. We need to think radically about what we need and think long term. And politicians, some politicians are very good at that, but a lot of our political thinking is a little bit short term, and this demands some innovation in how we address that too.
So fantastic way to close. We do not need the same old, same old. We need something very different. So I'm just going to say thank you to Nir, who's, thank you so much, Nir, for getting involved and supporting the mission. And we're following you closely with all the wonderful stuff that you're doing in the US. So thank you, Nir. And thank you so much, well, both Lynn's and of course, James, and we're all going to be around for a bit. And so big applause for everyone here. And so now, we're going to have a quick handover. So now's your chance to take a quick loo break. Quick handover switch with our next session, which is Health as Wealth, bringing health into ESG for healthy growth. So can I welcome our next chair and panelist. So John Godfrey is someone who I work with very closely. And we have Kieran and Jordan are here. And I hope Tracy is on the line from AXA. Excellent. There she is.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Tracy. We're just having a quick handover. I think we will start. So I will just very quickly sort of introduce our next chair, who's John Godfrey, who I know very, very well, because we set up and run Business for Health, which is a social venture, which has been running for the last year and a half, and we'll come on to that, and John will give you some background to that. And we'll same format. We've got a wonderful panelists here, Kieran and Jordan and Tracy behind us, and we also have a recording from Sir Michael Marmot, which we'll also be showing. So, but over to you, John. We'll kickstart the session.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tina, and that was a terrific first session. So it's going to be a tough act to follow. But what you didn't say about me was that the reason I became personally very interested in this cause was because I went to my sort of 55. I went to my 55-year-old bloke checkup, the thing that is now we're worrying about the funding of, and I was told I was a serious diabetic, and so that probably saved my life. And the upshot of which is that I can't eat puddings, but I do get free metformin. So I think it is a good outcome all round. But what we're going to talk about in this session is health equals wealth. And that was one thing that was abundantly proved during the COVID pandemic. And it's true, the stats will tell you, at a personal level, at a family level, at a community level, and at the broader level of society as a whole. It's also true for economies, and Andy Haldane, with his 60 billion figure, also made the point last week that we are at a tipping point, in his view, and his view is usually a correct view. The tipping point is that health improvement, or health, has gone from being a driver of economic growth to being a headwind holding back economic growth. So that makes what we're trying to do super important. Now, we set up Business for Health when the APPG decided that the solutions to this healthy longevity and aging issue didn't just sit in the public sector. And this has been a problem of the political divide, that many on the left have thought it's a job for the government alone to fix. Many on the right have, as James has said very well earlier, assumed that the nanny state shouldn't get involved at all, and every Englishmen should have a perfect right to eat and drink themselves to an early grave, which is what I was trying to do before my diagnosis. But what we concluded at the APPG was that business had a big role in doing this. People spend the vast majority of their lives in work for most people, and their employers have a huge influence in their health outcomes. So there is a role for business at the level of the employer. And on the panel, we have Jordan Cummins from the CBI, who is, they are leading the charge on employer health, because employers can't go on losing productivity, losing people, and we've had numbers put on mental health costs for business and so on. We have to address that, especially in a tight labour market. Business have a second role, which is as producers of goods and services. Are my customers healthier or less healthier as a result of consuming what I produce? Well, we have a lot of activity taking place in that space. This is about, for example, investors taking the food system to task. And Share Action is a fantastic pressure group which works closely with Business for Health and with others to do that, with Danone, with Unilever, with Tesco. It's all about formulation and labeling, but there are many other areas beside. And this has a logic to it, in that, in just the same way that most investors became really seized of climate when they realized that you don't want to end up owning the last coal mine as a stranded asset, investors are now beginning to realize you don't want the same thing in the health space. So that is a terrific subject for us to get into. It's increasingly important, and I'm sure that the panel will have plenty of thoughts on that, and Tracy is a big investor herself. The third way in which business has a role in this is in the impact it has on the communities in which it operates. It's the broadest scope if you steal the three scopes from the carbon debate. And that is something about how we work in the towns and cities where we operate, and what is our impact on local housing and prosperity. Now, we're going to see before we get into the panel discussion, a video recorded by Sir Michael Marmot. I'm very privileged to be working with my day job hat on with Sir Michael about how we design cities and towns to be healthier in the outcomes they deliver. And Michael, of course, wrote the original Marmot report about 12 years ago about health inequalities. He wrote an update 10 years on from that. I think both were filed in the do nothing box by government, because I think Michael was arguing at that point for a very public sector solution which cost a lot of money. Michael has now realized, I think, that business has a role in this, and you can leverage private money in and private support in to deliver good outcomes. We're not all bad guys in the business space. So, Tina, can we roll the video at that point?
Yeah, Richard is just about to play. Thank you, Richard.
Britain is facing all sorts of problems at the moment, but we're not unique as a country in facing those problems. And the question is, what's the role of business in dealing with this? A very narrow role of business is to say business has one function, to make a profit. And that's all there is, nothing else. That's the only moral purpose of business. I don't think too many people would put that across forcefully today. We need to be looking at the way society functions, at these important values in society. My own view is that the two key drivers should be equity of health and well-being of the population, and second, preserving the planet. And business has an absolutely vital role to play in both of those. In the report we did, The Business of Health Equity, the Marmot Review for Industry, we identified three important domains. One, the quality of employment, and that's a no-brainer. Providing good employment for employees is a virtuous circle. It will improve their health and well-being, and it will make for a better company, a more prosperous company. It will improve the bottom line. The second big area is the quality of goods and services. Our business is producing goods and services that improve health and well-being or damage health and well-being. And if you're investing, are you going to invest in companies that improve health and well-being or damage them? It's been suggested we should add H to ESG, environment, social, health, and governance. And the third is the wider impact. We've been working with public sector institutions to say they should see themselves as anchor institutions having a positive impact on the communities in which they operate, on the environment. This means purchasing chains, employment practices, and the like. And businesses have a clear role to play. The bottom line is we need to welcome business to go beyond simply maximizing shareholder value to being responsible players, important players in creating fairer, more just societies with greater equity of health and well-being and preserving the planet that we need for our survival.
Well, that was terrific from Sir Michael, and I think it demonstrates that the answer for business is that you actually can do well by doing good. These are not competing aims, and over a lengthy period of time, the company that does the right thing will also please its shareholders. So I didn't introduce the panel formally to you, but let me do that now, and then we'll open up with a few questions around the panel and then some questions from the audience. So at the far end here you have Jordan Cummins. Jordan, do you want to introduce yourself and your role to the group?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, John. I'm Jordan. I'm the CBI's Health Director. Most of you might know who the CBI is, but If you don't, we're the biggest business body in the country. So we represent about a third of the private sector workforce. It's about 6.97 million people. You'll usually see us in the papers shouting about how terrible the economy is, and we still do all of that a lot of the time in the last few weeks. But as well as that, we also have a big new function on health. And for us, that kind of spans everything from a really solid life science base, a really attractive environment to grow lots of the research that was in the session just before this one. Lots of bringing the health service closer to business, which has been a long-standing challenge for both sides, if we're being honest. And lots of new work, which I'm really excited to talk about later, on the workforce health element, which was trailed in the last session, because this for us is the big outstanding prize that we just haven't effectively gone after, I would say, in recent years. How long have I got, John? Is that enough, or can I go further?
You can go further if you like, Jordan.
All right, so just to touch on the last one, I guess, a little bit more, because we're launching it tomorrow, so I'd be remiss if not talking about it. We've been building a work health index in partnership with Business for Health this year. And when we've been talking about business wants to do more, business is interested, businesses should lean in. Business as a term is slightly disingenuous. It's a really fractured economy. There are big firms that have loads of money. There are big firms that have no money. There are conglomerates who aren't headquartered here. There are SMEs who have no time or money. And the majority of people don't work in big, shiny office buildings. They work in 1, 2, 5, 10-person organizations where the chief exec is also the health lead and also the marketing lead and the salesperson. So when we're talking about business leaning in en masse, and I think this is where the climate comparison is really important, there are lots of businesses, thousands, who basically just don't have time for this. Even if they want to, there is no time in the day to think about proactive measures. And that is where you need a kind of big national organization to kind of pick up the mantle and say, look, these are the new rules of the game. This is how we think you should prioritize investment. We think it because of all of these reasons over here. And to do so, importantly, we're going to help you on that journey. We're not just going to set up a framework and then let you go on it. And so that's why the kind of indexing piece that we can talk a bit more about later is really important to us, because taking the FTSE on a journey is one thing, but taking the rest of the economy on a journey is much, much harder. And that's why you will still have thousands of firms today who say that climate isn't my job. You know, my job is to sell groceries on the corner. I'm not here to solve climate change. And yet the zeitgeist has had to move forward to make everyone think a little bit about their day-to-day activities, their supply chains, the stuff they sell. And we can get there on health. It will take a lifetime to do so. But if you want every firm to think about this in the same way as they think about climate, you've got to give them some tools. And they've got to be either from government or organizations like us. They've got to be paid for or not paid for, but they've got to be out there. And you've got to really signpost them heavily. So hopefully get into that later.
Well, lots of food for thought there. So I'm sure there'll be questions about how we engage SMEs. Now, definitely not an SME is AXA Health. And I'm really delighted that Tracy Garrett, the Chief Executive of AXA Health, is online with us. I hope you can hear us all right, Tracy. Do you want to give us a thumbs up? Yep. Okay. Well, AXA know more about health than almost any other business in the UK. So do you want to tell us a bit more about you and your role and what AXA is doing in this space?
I will do. So yes, hello everyone. As John has alluded, we support the health and well-being of almost 3 million people in the UK. And our company, which you probably historically would have known as PPP, actually dates back to 1940 and predates the NHS. We have as our customers about a third, about 33% of the UK employers who choose to provide health and well-being services and health insurance to their workforce. And that's made up of both those big corporates, but actually also importantly, the much smaller firms as well that Jordan kind of referenced. And the fact that we have such longevity as a business in this space and we have such scale, I think gives us really valuable insight about what interventions work and which of those interventions provide the best value in terms of disease prevention and health improvement. So the support that we give to our customers at AXA Health is really varied and far-reaching, everything from helping older people to live longer and safely, independently in their own homes with technology, right through delivery of over 45,000 virtual GP appointments a month, and through the identification, screening, diagnosis and treatment of cancer. So just a couple of thoughts on the topic. I think firstly, the insights that we have lead us to believe, and this is why we chose to become a founding member of Business for Health actually 18 months ago. We believe that businesses of all sizes and across all industries and sectors are really uniquely positioned to help facilitate good health in our society. In the same way that many believe the education system contributes to the health of society through encouraging good nutrition, learning about the importance of physical activity, the culture which businesses have, and actually just the sheer amount of time that people spend within those businesses can be a major factor and contributor to health for good or bad. And as I said, having such a large corporate base, we do know the things that work, and we want to share that insight. We want to bring that insight. It really resonated with me earlier when James Bethell spoke about, the need for a paradigm shift, a public-private combination to really tackle this, and the move to prevention, because we have many examples through our corporate client base of deploying preventative measures that have really paid dividends on many fronts, ultimately improving the health of the staff members in the workforce, but along the way also improving absenteeism, improving productivity, improving actually employee satisfaction, engagement and retention too. So for me, it's just a win-win-win, and I think should have a really good conversation today.
Win-win-win idea is one that I think resonates certainly with me as someone in business. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Kieran Boyle, who is the Chief Executive of Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation. I think I've got that right, which is itself a big investor. But Kieran is also leading the work of LIPH, which is long-term investors in public health. And Kieran, do you want to tell us a bit about that, if you could?
Yeah, I will do. Well, first, it's a real pleasure to be here today. We're going to need a bigger room, aren't we? Metaphorically and actually just very practically as well. My name's Kieran. I run an organisation called Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation. We're one of the country's largest charitable endowments. And our mission is to invest in a healthier society. And we do that in two ways. We invest our endowment in things that have a positive health impact. And then we also use the proceeds from our endowment to run real-world experiments to identify ways in which you can create healthier societies, and it's all very practically orientated. I'm really glad that Sir Michael spoke about health equity, because we really need to bring that front and centre to this debate as well, because we know that health is not evenly distributed. We saw that through COVID. We saw that it wasn't at all equal. We saw that your risk of getting COVID and the severity of it really mattered on account of whether you had lived in multi-generational housing, if you had to travel into work, if you had to travel into work on public transport. We saw that it went deeper than that. We saw that it was higher if you lived in areas with really poor air quality or a lack of access to affordable, healthy food. So the patterns of COVID are, of course, the patterns of every other health issue that we know about. The positive framing of that is that means that there's a really big role for business in improving the environments which we live in, which promotes better health and is also good for business itself. So there's a bigger part that we can all play. And if I've got a couple more minutes, perhaps I can give some really practical examples of what that looks like. So some of these real world experiments that we're running with businesses, both big and small, because it needs to be both. I totally agree with Jordan, around how you can make places healthier for all of us. The punchline being that although these issues are complex, the solutions themselves don't have to be. So I'll give you 5 very practical examples. Firstly, there's loads of stuff around entrepreneurs just accessing new mass markets. So we set up this thing called the Good Food Fund. It's investing in entrepreneurs who are trying to work out how you get snacks that are healthy at an affordable price point. So, you know, for example, it's invested in something called Urban Legends. They make donuts that are affordable, but they have 50% of the calories that a normal donut has, but it works at a mass market price point. There are companies responding to consumer preferences. So Tesco's, for example, we've done a load of work with Tesco's about how they can promote healthier products and not promote less healthy products. And what we've been able to do is look at the till receipts and see that customers are buying healthier baskets of food, but it's actually improved store profitability. So Tesco's are just rolling this out nationwide. Third is about innovative public-private partnerships that we're seeing. So, for example, something that we've partnered with is a social prescribing scheme. So that's where general practitioners are prescribing debt advice to their patients that they know who are likely to have financial distress. And we know that financial distress can lead to health distress, and that can lead to financial distress. The debt advice works. On average, the patients who have that debt advice have about £2,000 more income a year. Their health is improving, but the whole thing can be paid for by housing associations and utilities firms, because it's really important to them that they get paid back regularly by people who need to pay them. Fourth is about examples of prioritising co-benefits, particularly as relate to climate. So there are loads of examples, including, for example, we've worked with lots of businesses locally around here for them to use electric cargo bikes for last mile delivery. Again, it's sustainable in all forms of the word, but reduces air pollution, which is really, really bad for health, particularly around hospitals, as we have 2 very large ones based by us just here. And then finally, and perhaps I'll come into this a bit later, seeing investors playing a huge role. So we're part of something called the Healthy Markets Coalition. It's a coalition of large investors. So those are, you know, pension funds, life insurance funds, with about $5 trillion of assets behind it. And it's worked with Unilever to help Unilever think about how it can be transparent globally on the healthiness of its sales. And that's really important because it helps investors work out, well, actually, Unilever, what are you doing versus Danone or Nestle? And how are you helping society be healthier? Common thing to all of that is everybody's thinking about health as an asset. I think that's kind of the critical bit for the role that business can play in this space.
Thanks very much, Kieran. And yes, Unilever, I think, has about 3 billion customers globally. So they can really move the dial on health. And I'm so pleased that we got onto health equity, which is, of course, Michael Marmot's great theme, because we talked earlier, I think James and Damien both talked about the 5 years of healthy life expectancy being in the government's manifesto for several iterations. What changed, I think, in 2019 was the rider to that, which said, and to narrow the gap between the richest and the poorest, which at 20 years is far, far, far too wide to be acceptable. But I wanted to stick really with the analogies between climate and health. When I started work in the city, there might have been 2 or 3 sort of hippie-ish types on the corner of the trading floor who were interested in climate, and nobody else was interested at all. Everybody now is aware of the need to have climate factors in their investment decisions. And I was going to ask the panel, how do we get to a similar place around health? And what do we need to do to get a health version of the Stern report and a COP1 on health, which is probably we're 26 behind the climate folk at the moment, but COP1 would be a good start. Tracy, maybe I can start with you online, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine, John. Thank you. Well, I absolutely see the parallels, and I think, you know, health impacts the quality of life for individuals, and poor health, as we have already heard in the last hour, has a devastating impact on individuals and their families. But as we've also said, we know at a macro level, poor health reduces productivity for businesses. It negatively impacts the economy. We've heard Andy Haldane's research around that. And according to the World Economic Forum, the UK healthy life expectancy is lagging behind other nations. And we know, don't we, that people are going to need to work longer. And as we all live longer, without the health to continue to be able to work, they're not going to be able to fund their old age either. So I think the governments need to consider how to incentivise employers perhaps to provide more health and wellbeing support for employees. I do think steps around disclosure in the way that has occurred for climate can be a really important lever, whether that's disclosure around the steps that an organisation is taking workforce, or indeed, as has been alluded to, the ratings in terms of the products and services that are being delivered, because reporting and accountability, as we've seen in so many cases, can really move the needle. So I think there are a number of items that are easier to do that don't actually cost the government money, but a drive towards some of those things. It would be a really important step forward. And people are now getting used to investors, whether it's retail investors or corporate investors, are getting much more used to looking for those disclosures and making discerning choices about the firms that they will decide to place their business with and support. So I think activism and the rise of activism can play a really important role.
Jordan, I'll come to you next. Thoughts on how we make more noise and how we achieve the success that the climate movement is achieving. But on this disclosures point, business is a kind of a whole mixed bag of different activities. How do you get to a disclosure regime that sensibly compares something which involves an inherently risky occupation and something which involves an occupation like mine, where you're shifting bits of paper metaphorically from one side of a desk to another?
Yeah, good question. And it'll be the thing that probably unwinds some really fantastic effort as we go through this journey. There will be 100 people up and down the country working on a brilliant reporting framework that could work. And then you'll give it a go and it'll fall over. And that's life. That's what happened with climate. That's why it took us decades to get to the right set of reporting for climate, way longer than it should have done. So I think commonality is your big one. So you need to have a relatively usable, relatively robust framework that won't be the be all and end all. It won't be bells and whistles for every firm. It just can't be, especially if it's one of the first ones that make it through. And I know, Kieran, you're doing some really great work on this too. You need some big institutional backers. Government needs to be behind it. Kieran was saying that WEF are behind one of the ones that they're working on, which is a really great example, the World Economic Forum. And then you just need something that continually reiterates why this is a good thing, right? We all watch Netflix documentaries. We know the world is falling apart. We know all the fish are dying. We don't need any more of those. It's fantastic if they keep getting made to reiterate it. What we do need is some kind of campaign that people can get around. 1.5 degrees is brilliant. You can talk about it in the boardroom and you can talk about it down the pub. You can get your hands around it. People know that it's a bad thing. They don't really get the science by and large, normal people like me, but they get that reaching it is a good thing. And so you just need something that's usable and that's palatable for normal people, because normal people work in normal businesses. Businesses aren't big kind of glass machines that aren't made up of human beings. You need to still make human beings make human decisions about how they run their businesses. So I'm quite keen that you have this kind of galvanizing moment in the year, which is what COP does, and that you have a kind of moment where everyone gets around the table and says, look, we all agree with this. We're all on a journey. We're going to do it again next year, so please be better, otherwise I'm going to shout at you. And that's what firms expect when they go to COP, by and large. So we do need that galvanizing moment. I think we need commonality of standards. So instead of us all going off and paying millions of pounds to do frameworks, maybe we'll just get behind less of them and do that really well. And then I think we just need this kind of campaign. And to James's point at the last session, once it's a doorstep issue, it won't matter what party you work for, because you'll have to talk about it. Your constituents will tell you about it. And so getting around that kind of usable campaign would be really helpful. We're going to try and lean in the COP thing next year. Someone's just got to do it. So we're going to do something in September, and maybe that'll be COP1, or maybe it'll just be another conference, but let's see.
Thanks very much, Jordan. And I mean, I think a lot of companies, regardless of the framework, if it's respectable and it works and it's fairly easy to do, will use it to compare against their previous performance rather than against Logs PLC down the road, which is in a completely different sector. So it's setting hurdles for yourself. And I'm interested in what you said, and Kieran will no doubt have a view on this, about how do you balance the idea of letting 1,000 flowers bloom in terms of ideas around this with avoiding what I think one sees sometimes in the climate movement, which is a lot of people all trying to do roughly the same thing and tripping over each other. It can be a little bit sort of Monty Python-esque sometimes as all these splinter groups emerge. But Kieran, how do you balance that properly, do you think?
Well, first point I would say is that the climate analogy is a good one. Of course, we start with the advantage that there has been a climate movement here, and we can build upon it in all sorts of very practical ways. So firstly, I mean, we should be really clear that the climate issue is a health issue, and a lot of what you would do to improve climate also improves health. So just think about nutrition, food, farming, think about air pollution, construction, freight. At a very practical level, think about how we're going to keep people warm and healthy in their homes. These are all climate issues. And so firstly, I think we've got to be careful not to kind of separate out these things, particularly if there's energy in certain places. Secondly, we can borrow, steal, pride, whatever it is, whatever's working. So we know that the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 approach to climate has been a very helpful way of people spotting what their particular role to play is. And as you say, we can use exactly the same in health to think about products that companies sell, how they think about their workforce and their impact on wider community. And because you can use these frameworks, that's why with people in this room, we've been able to, in very short order, create this thing called LIFE. The spelling's rubbish, but long-term investors in people's health. And that's now got, I think, over $7 trillion of assets behind it. I mean, this is serious money that makes companies stand up and pay attention when they're engaged by those investors. To your point around how do you have sufficient flowers blooming, but not too many, I guess it's which ones do we really want to see blooming. I totally agree. We need to be very careful not to have a bajillion different frameworks that we use. But a lot of this, I think, is about very simple storytelling. What is the story that you tell to a very small business about what they can do to think about the mental health of their staff in a way that's affordable for them and that will translate into things that really matter to them around how their customers feel or around how their employees carry on attending work. So I think we do need 1,000 flowers blooming that sort of way. In fact, we need 10,000 of those stories.
Thanks very much, Kieran. We're starting to get a few questions or interesting questions from the audience. And I think the lady there in the middle was first, and then you were second. So please, do you want to put your question? You need a microphone.
Hi, my name is Mayoni Gunratner, and I'm a former NHS surgeon, colorectal and pelvic floor. And I left pretty much for the reasons discussed here today. I'm the founder of Human Health, and we work towards helping women to live their best and shiniest life. So whilst it's been an incredible discussion and it's been brilliant, so thank you for this. I'm slightly disappointed we've not addressed the inequalities brought about by being female. I think, we need to address the fact that over 9 million women are aged between 35 to 55 and representing a huge amount of the workforce. They also represent over 75% of the consumer buying population. So we've got a big voice, yet woefully unaddressed. And I think every day I'm amazed at, despite the kind of noise, in the public press at the moment about the menopause, how many women sit there in tears at the thought of losing their job, their marriage, and their mind that have not been addressed by their general practitioner. And I totally understand why, having been in that position within the NHS. We need to be able to talk to these women and explain to them how we can help them without necessarily using hormones. I think this is important too, But we need to help these women understand how their cortisol-driven insulin-resistant cells are poorly equipped to deal with the dropping amounts of progesterone and estrogen and testosterone. And that's why they feel like they're going mad, you know, and that's why they are at risk of losing their jobs and at risk of losing their relationships. These are really powerful, important conversations.
That's a fantastic point. Well said. And of course, women also tend to bear the brunt of caring responsibilities within a family, you know, for older parents, and so that compounds the whole issue further. I think some companies are now beginning to take action around understanding at least menopause issues better. In the broader system, I mean, for employees, Jordan, is that something you're taking account of now?
Yeah, you only need to look at the inactivity rates to know that we've got a higher volume of women.
Sorry, can we get the mic?
Oh, sorry. And the inactivity rates, which get renewed tomorrow, I think, show that the volume of women now deciding not to come back to the workforce is on the up for the first time in quite some time. So there's a conflation of stuff here. You don't need another white guy talking about how we've got this wrong, probably on a panel like this. But what you do need is an organisation to step in and say that we take this seriously. We want to help you along this journey. Case in point, last week we were in Scotland talking to medium-sized businesses in Edinburgh. And they said what worked for us actually was less guides and stuff that were pushed down from our male chief execs. We decided to hire a nurse that was on the staff full time, completely confidential. The data we track doesn't get seen necessarily by the board. And that was good for them. It was a fantastic practical thing they could do on a firm by firm level. Not everyone will obviously be able to do that. So you probably do need national organisations pushing for a mix of public information. And also you need to encourage people to do firm by firm investments where possible. I just think the debate like this is perfect because you just need it out there and you need to have that evidence-driven answer that you just gave me, which I couldn't repeat now, but I wish I could, to push this along a bit further.
Could I add something, John?
Yes, I was just about to ask you to, Tracy, so go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really great example, actually, of where there's a segmentation and a whole range of options available to support businesses, large and small. So, of course, for some large corporates, for some multinationals, very big companies, they will choose to take the advice of someone like us and to put in place, you know, diagnostics or whatever. And indeed, we do that. But right at the other end of the spectrum, there's a whole library of collateral available that, you know, one of the easiest things to do is just to signpost to those small businesses, to those very small companies that this is available. And, you know, for that proliferation, education and information is the starting point for, you know, those women to be able to engage with their healthcare practitioners on an informed basis and to know what to go and ask for and to know what they ought to be entitled to. So I think it's just a really great example that it doesn't always have to cost money. It can actually be simpler things that really don't cost a lot at all, if anything.
If that's all right, because we've got a lot of hands going up and people who want to make a point. The gentleman in the second row.
Thanks very much, John, and the panel. We've used the word silo quite a lot this afternoon. Debbie and I, both from the Silver Marketing Association, were talking about it earlier on, came up in the first panel. It seems to me there's quite often the silo effect or disconnect within businesses themselves. On one hand, you're talking about internal well-being programs, and there's also then the corporate communications that go out to government and other bodies. But yet the marketing departments may well be putting out a different message to the people that they're putting out their product, services, etc. to. I'm excluding any panel members or audience here online or physical from that. But in terms of what can be done to bridge that disconnect, bearing in mind a lot of marketing departments don't necessarily reflect the age demographic of the people that they're promoting to, what can be done?
Gosh, that is an interesting question. Tracy, do you want to talk about that? I can fill in after you, but what's at AXA?
Yeah, well, I do have a thought on it, and it comes back a little bit to what Michael Marmot said, actually, which is I think the starting point is for an organisation to be really clear about its purpose. So if I talk about AXA Health, we talk about empowering people to be the best version of themselves. That's our mission, that's our purpose. And that applies equally for us to our workforce as it does to our customers. So every initiative that we're thinking about, we are thinking about, is this aligned with that purpose? And I think, for me, it goes right back to basics. I know it sounds a bit like mother has an apple pie, but really, if an organisation is committed to its purpose, it should apply equally internally and externally.
As an insurance company person and a pension company person, I get incredibly bored with the same marketing pictures of happy pensioners on beaches in white linen. But, Kieran, I think you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I guess it plays back into what we heard from the previous panel about the need for a sort of kind of shift in thinking, paradigm shift, so that it becomes less about, is this about what we're marketing, how we're treating our own staff, etc., etc. It's just the way that we do things. In a way, I'm just concerned about silos, but whose voices aren't heard in this. So if we go back to the health equity point, I think that's probably the area that we need to be equally aware of. So take a lot of employee wellbeing programs. We've worked with some of the biggest wellbeing providers. If you tend to look at those wellbeing programs, they tend to work best for already wealthy staff, and we know that health equals wealth. So often they don't reach those wellbeing programs to the cleaners, the receptionists, or indeed the outsourced staff. So, but if we're going to tackle some of the kind of the society-wide questions that we pulled out, we need to. So, really excellent question, and I would add to the point about silos, actually, whose voices aren't being heard, how well representative is this?
It's a great point about the forgotten workforce of the outsourced people, Kieran. I think the next question was from the lady there in the yellow jacket.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Stephanie Lung. I'm part of the investment community focusing on age tech. I'm quite interested to maybe get a point of view from Legal & General and AXA Health on you talked a lot about health and well-being for employees, and I'm glad the question was around women. There are 5.4 million family caregivers employed today. 10% of them quit every year because of the stress of family caregiving. They're juggling two jobs. One is looking after a loved one, and one is a full-time job. And most of them do not tell their employer they're actually caregiving because they are frightened of losing their jobs. I'm quite interested to understand, I'm assuming with the insurance it's an employee benefit, it's an EAP. How do you raise awareness of that internally inside an organization if it's not on the CEO's agenda? If it's head of well-being benefits as an HR person, how do you really get this to the top of the agenda? Because it's going to impact the complete shape of the future of work. And I used to be head of DEI for MEF at Uber and head of women there, and we panicked every year about gender pay gap. But that's for a much younger population of the workforce. And I'm just thinking, is this really top of mind for companies? And do they really care? Because it's a huge dent on any senior workforce members, because family caregiving is only going to get worse, much, much worse than before it gets better.
I totally agree with you, Stephanie, that companies probably don't do enough in this space. And, there's the caregiver issue, there's the sandwich generation issue, who may be doing childcare and elder care at the same time. And it is incredibly difficult for the system. And I wouldn't say we do enough either at Legal & General. I would like to see us do more, and I hope we get there. Just on age tech generally, there are a lot of interesting things going on, as you will know. And one of the things we try to do through a philanthropic gift is actually support Edinburgh University in the Advanced Care Research Centre, which brings in engineering and robotics and medicine and all sorts of disciplines, which hopefully will help design care technologies of the future. But there is definitely more to do. I'm going to ask I'm going to ask Tracy actually if she's got a view on how best employers can accommodate rising rates of caregiving.
Yeah, I think there are two examples that I would give of really great practice, and it's counter a little bit to what Kieran was saying actually, because they are two big companies who, yes, 2 or 3 years ago, the extent of the services that they were taking from us was probably connected much more to their middle management upwards, but they've seen the light. And so one of them is, I'm not going to give their names because they haven't given me permission, but one is a major online retailer that often gets bad press. And they have rolled out 2 aspects of our proposition to their whole workforce, from their cleaners through their catering people in the cafeteria, through their packers and factory floor workers. And that's our taking care elder care proposition. They've made that available as a no-cost contribution for the 14,000 staff in the UK, from top to bottom of the organisation, to take that service for help with looking after their older ones or older relatives. The other is similarly a major kind of manufacturing company, about 9,000 staff in the UK, and they have taken an online app that is mental health support, and that again is going down to the lowest levels of the organisation. It's beyond the EAP service that we'll all be familiar with. It's mental health and physical health self-assessments, which in the event of certain trigger points being reached, they have the ability then to tap into some onward pathway services. So I do think that, you know, some larger organisations are absolutely recognising that actually, as much as anything, attraction and retention, as I said earlier, not just about the health and productivity points that undoubtedly come from that. And both of those, I think, are excellent best practice for carers' responsibilities.
We'll then take 2 or 3 questions together and try and wrap the session up. But just on the caregivers, Jordan.
So I also think we should just be really honest about it. Lots of facilitating this is going to cost business more money. So we could go around in circles about how we let people out of the workforce for longer. That doesn't cost us money. It's basically impossible. And that's not a bad thing, because some of the stuff we're talking about on long-term workforce health, you should pay dividends in terms of productivity and time back in the workforce for another bit of the workforce you've got over here. But we do need to be honest about the fact that we don't need teams to try and square this off in a really special Venn diagram in a way that you can have half a day out a year for social care if you need it, because it just will cost employers more money. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I guess we should just be honest about that conversation.
Thanks. Now, Tina, do you want to go? There's a question towards the back on that side, I think, and then there's another one further in on this side. It's a very lively session. It's great. And then somebody else over on the other side, I think.
Should we take all these?
Let's take 3 together, and then we can use those to wrap up the session.
Peter Ellis. I'm involved in healthcare as chairman of a couple of companies in different areas, but it was interesting this morning. The earlier session, the American speaker talked about the fine UK health system that he admired, and I thought, but also we had Michael Marmot talking about, obviously, healthcare. And if I remember from his earlier presentations and reports, one of the key issues for him was how do you influence people at an earlier stage in life, because what they learn in their early years, they will have difficulty changing as they get older. Now, it struck me that nobody's here talked about the education system and its role in that, which worries me as the way things are going. But secondly, it does seem to me that the CBI and business has a role. It has an interest. Obviously, healthy employees are good for them and good for their businesses, but also they have power. to influence both the government, which I think is one of our biggest problems, because we have to break down this single health system, which is stopping innovation. Our problem is not innovation. The UK is brilliant at innovation. It's getting it into its own system that's been shown up. And we are, you know, the last but one in the OECD countries. And we've got to recognize that and do something about it. But I think the CBI could do that as a mouthpiece.
Hold that thought, Jordan. I think there's another question. Yes, there we are.
Hello, it's Anthony Phillips from Wellcome International. We've been working in the UAE and Africa, and one of the key things that is actually recognising that managing your personal health and wellness is actually a fifth life capability. So reading, writing, mathematics, using technology. If you look at the UK, and I've reviewed many competency frameworks, etc. If you look at apprenticeship programs, there's a TV advert on the moment called Rise. Actually, managing your personal wellness and health isn't a competency recognised. It's fragmented. You have resilience. To me, resilience is come and work in a shit environment and will help you cope. You know, it doesn't talk about hydration as an example. If you're not hydrated, you're more likely to create accidents, for example. In nursing, make mistakes. Look at the NHS, how many indemnity claims are due to maybe lack of energy. So one of the things then as a free question is why don't we recognise personal health and wellness management as a fifth life capability?
That sounds like a Kieran question, but was there one more on that side?
There's another question here.
No, maybe we're done. Right, I think we're at time, so I think 30 seconds each in order that Tina can stay on schedule. Tracy, do you want to kick us off with those questions and your sort of closing observations?
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I think I referenced earlier that we definitely see that health education and helping people to understand what's important to them in ensuring they have better health is the starting point. Of course, it will come down to individual motivations to do something about it. Just knowing is rarely enough. But it's going to require a multi-pronged attack. So look, yes, education is really important. Again, we're trying to do our bit on that in terms of what we make publicly available as information. There's quite a lot of thought leadership and health improvement content that we make available to anybody who looks at our web pages. It doesn't have to be somebody who's paying for our services, but I agree. I think it's got to be a real plank as we move forward.
So our next session, our final session, is creating the world testbed. So we're trying to make this a little bit more specific about what we mean and what we're planning in the Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission, and our aims to create essentially the world's sort of testbed for health. So I'm going to hand over to my dear colleague Lynn Corner, who had spoke before, but she's going to be chairing the session, and she'll set everything up and introduce everyone on our panel. So over to you, Lynn.
Thanks, Tina. And this is, I've been so looking forward to this session because this is about the practicalities, because we've talked a lot about the need for dialogue to create a movement, but I think hope you get that for this Quantum Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission, this is about action. This is about actually moving forward to actually think about how in the UK, we've just got the most amazing opportunity to build just the world's biggest test bed. And by that, we mean really mobilizing citizens, mobilizing organizations, mobilizing industry, business to really create an environment where we can take the data and co-innovate, co-develop products and services which we know people need in their lives, education, skills, the whole mantra. So I'm delighted to be chairing this session. I'm joined by friends and colleagues from the US, my colleague David Furman, Richard Chow and Nick Palmerini, the Director of the National Innovation Centre for Ageing. So I'm going to ask them with no further ado to perhaps introduce themselves and say a few words about the mission. Can I start with you?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you for resisting up to now. It's been a long day. Couple of things. First of all, I am the director of a National Innovation Center for Aging, not the Newcastle Center for Aging, Tina said in the beginning. We're a national institution based in Newcastle, which I think is a good reason for in many ways. Also, to somehow try to push a little farther the gravitation about innovation happening most of the time in the south of England and push it forward. We have an advantage there that could be seen a disadvantage sometimes, and somehow inequalities are far more relevant in the northeast of England, and data of the pandemic are out there. Allow us just to play the same paradigm that we have in Netherlands. They're very good in managing the water because they have to deal with the water every day. So this is one thing that is driving us in the way we do the innovation, which I think is the second thing it's important to highlight today. We need innovation. Innovation needs to be pushed. It's not design, it's innovation first. And innovation has to be seen from all the perspective. Technology is one side of it, but we need new business models. I think the mission has a purpose just to empower a completely different way on how we see the things today. I guess we have seen a fantastic, we have attended a fantastic journey up to here. You see the many dimensions gravitating around the one thing which is missing, which is the innovation. How we can put them together, how we can literally somehow challenge most of our interests, desires, ambitions that we typically put first because that's what we know, in something that honestly we don't know. And that's exactly what the mission aims to just try to join the dots. And I think you've seen so many perspectives, and I guess everyone in this room and online knows that or have realized how many dots could be connected simply just discussing about today. And I guess the session before about the businesses is showing how in how many dimensions we as citizens or employees, we're the same entity, the same person, but we change our social role when someone is interacting with us as our employer or the provider of services. That has a different impact if it's local, it's national, it's in my job, it's in my everyday life. So I think if you see from this perspective, I guess what the mission aims to do is just to show there is a possibility of joining these missing dots with some intelligence that it's not represented by us, it's represented by us. If we don't bring that intelligence, we won't go any further. So this is an attempt to try to make a step forward in looking forward about what's happening around ourselves and be us the actors of change, because otherwise nothing will gonna change. Why we care a lot about the climate change? Just to see dolphins back again in Venice, fantastic. So what? If we won't be on the planet, right? So it's us who has to take advantage about what the climate change finally impacts of us. Yeah, sure, someone has to take advantage selling more electric cars. There will be a new market out there. We will learn a lot about things that we still don't know about today, but that's where exactly we just come into play, how to make them meaningful to us, how this thing could be relevant for our everyday life. And when I say our, it's ours and the people around us. So it's important that we start understanding a completely different way. This is a play for empathy. It's not a play for just, the advancement of the sake of science itself. We need it. We desperately need it. But who cares if it doesn't impact us, right? So that's exactly what this mission aims to achieve, just to add what we call a sort of a layer of intelligence which is missing, which is not necessarily the artificial we talk about. First of all, is a human intelligence, which is provided, as Lynn well said in the beginning, from us as citizens, as with our ambition, desires. We typically think about needs in all this mapping. We never talk about wants, what really we want, what we really care about. It's what we think this mission really should have to achieve. The time has come to do it because we don't have much more time left, we think. And also, I guess we have all the power around us just to make it happen. And technology is an enabler for sure, and we'll discuss in the session in a second. But technology is nothing without someone that it's able to understand it and it's able to drive it, because we want to do it in an ethical way. And again, the big difference between us and the United States, you heard before, I lived in the United States and I moved to the United States when I was 50. It's one thing when you go to the United States in your 20s, everything is wonderful. At 50, you see they don't have infrastructure. They somehow sometimes are called the first country of the third world because they miss the social state. they don't have family connections for many reasons. And again, it's not have to blame them. It just, we have an idea about the United States coming from the other side of the pond, which is a shaped idea, very well deployed somehow by the Hollywood, okay? But then when you go there and you're 50 and you see people that are not allowed to access to first aid, literally outside of an hospital because they didn't have a credit card just to swipe and go in, you completely see the difference of our system that has a lot of issues and troubles, obviously. But that basic of the society that is joining us as humans and helping others as a foundational element, it's something that we should have to think about back again as a big asset and a value on top of which we can make the change. And being a country from this side of the pond, also the way we ethically use the data and all the debate that we have about the application that obviously we heard about, but the debate, what ethical was a healthy debate because we as citizens would like to cope better with the organization in delivering more about who we are in a consistent way that is respectful of us. And it's not necessarily given in some countries. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Nick. Richard, can I ask you to talk a little bit now about some of the work in the mission on consumer health data and the business of prevention?
Sure. So thanks again to Nick, Lynn and Tina for this invitation to join. And thank you all for coming to King's College London. So I head up aging research at King's. Many of you will be familiar with it. But as an educator, as an academic, I really emphasize the importance of education. And Lynn mentioned that, Lynn Cox, earlier on this afternoon. And our mission here is to educate not only undergraduates, postgraduates, PhDs, but every one of us need better education, even to understand the terminology of health, aging, and longevity. You know, we're all confused. It depends on which stage of life you're at. Oh, I'm never going to be old, or I'm never going to be ill. And as Nick quite rightly said, we need to also join the dots between citizen and workforce and consumer and community. And more importantly, we've heard earlier on about wellness, illness. Are we patients? When do we become a patient? And we stop being a consumer and we stop being well. So it's education about the terminology that we use, we understand, and how we can address this issue across the life course. It's not about after you reach a certain number, it has to start from kindergarten or even before. All of the determinants of, for example, in utero environment, women are now giving birth later on in life. They're more at risk, for example, of gestational diabetes. And what is the impact of throughout the life course on the child? So we need to start even educating from kindergarten, the language of wellness and health, so that we're aware of it. It's not something that will happen in the distant future. It will impact across our life course as we grow through, you know, in the community as consumers. So, for example, I go to schools, primary schools, and I bring them crisp packets or biscuits and so on. And I tell them about numbers on the back, just for science, not about wellness and health, but so that they are aware. Are we aware of what is around us impacting our wellness? I don't call it health, wellness. We talked about the exposome, and Lynn again mentioned that. Very important that we consider every aspect of our existence on this planet, the air we breathe, the number of hours we sleep. It's not only about counting steps or counting calories. It's our whole environment. And we've heard a lot about physical health, mental health, but more importantly, financial health, because we're all thinking about very few things, mostly about our bank account more recently. So it's the financial considerations that impact upon anxiety levels and you know, psychological wellness. So I don't want to go into detail, but we need to be aware and push the message out about the exposome, what we're exposed to at different periods throughout the life course. What a child considers is very different from what I consider, or someone a little older. So it's about lifelong learning as well, lifelong education, how we can get the message out As consumers, we don't regard ourselves as patients, hopefully. We may be living with multi-morbidities, a back pain or muscle ache and so on, which accumulates across throughout the life course. But we're still consumers. We still go to the supermarket, even with these conditions such as diabetes and so on. We need to utilize the environment, even the consumer environment, for education. How can we interact with, we mentioned, Unilever earlier on, Tesco's and so on. These are where we are interfacing day by day, several times a day, how we can work with these business partners as consumers in the community, or also in the workforce. So there are workforce providers of canteens and the environment that we are in. How can we work with these business partners to better deliver the message? It's education. It doesn't have to be formally in a university building. And how we can bring the message to the consumer where it matters, at the aisle perhaps, or at the checkout. You know, supermarkets are using that, you know, for selling things that are not so healthy. We all know it. But what can we do to work with them to educate the leaders or the captains of industry, the business leaders? They need to be educated. It's their health as well. So these are some of the challenges that we need to address. I won't take up more time now, but happy to answer questions later on. So I'll hand back to Lynn for the moment.
Well, we can definitely come back to those points in the discussion. Richard, thanks so much. And you mentioned about psychological aging, and in the first session this morning, we mentioned about the fact that brain capital was central to the mission. And I'm delighted to go to I think he's in Egypt, friend and colleague Harris Eyre, to talk a little bit about the mission of the Brain Capital Alliance, which is one of the partners in the mission. Hi, Harris.
Brilliant. Hi, Lynn. Good to see you. And just checking you guys can hear me on that end. Just checking you can hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. Well, yes, hello from Egypt, from COP27, the climate change conference. As some of you may have been reading in the media, we're quite challenged with logistics over here, and the Wi-Fi is not ideal. And so I almost wonder if I should just can't turn my video off to save bandwidth, because I don't want to create disturbances over there. Lynn, what would you suggest?
And just go ahead, Harris.
Okay, I didn't catch that. I'll just go.
Turn your camera off.
Okay, brilliant. So look, it's wonderful to be with you guys. Sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I today would like to stimulate the discussion and add brain capital.
That he was in Egypt and the Wi-Fi was terrible, so we may have lost Harris. Are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you for a moment, Harris. Go ahead.
Okay. Where did you lose me exactly?
Wait, you said you were going to tell us a little bit about the Brain Capital Alliance.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, the Brain Capital Alliance is a global coalition of it's a P3 partnership, public, private, people, and we're looking to reform economics to prioritize brain health and brain skills. And we are an outgrowth of the OECD's Neuroscience Inspired Policy Initiative, which we started a couple of years ago. And we fundamentally recognize that we need a human capital 2.0. Human capital, as many of you may be aware, has been wonderful in helping us to conceptualize the development of humans and people. And you guys have talked very well about the lifespan approach to that. But we recognize that there's a need to get much more precise and really sort of bring brain science into this thinking, because You know, our brains are under tremendous challenge these days. We know that rates of stress and mental health are increasing, and Alzheimer's is on the rise, and we know that fake news is a challenge as well for many people in different parts of the world. And so we conceptualize that our brains are very challenged, in that if we don't develop brain capital as a framework, we risk not really comprehending these challenges and dealing with them in an integrated fashion. And so that's what we do, is we bring in brain capital as brain health and brain skills together, where we know brain health very well, but brain skills are the skills which are critical in the modern world. Adaptability, problem solving, digital literacy, etc. And you know, we're thinking at the Brain Capital Alliance, in conclusion, about a dashboard for measuring brain capital. We're thinking about policy approaches across policy sectors, and then also investing approaches as well, from grants to philanthropy to venture capital. And I guess I would just say that we humbly offer the Brain Capital Alliance as a collaborator on this mission, and to think about how we can tailor it to the UK. What does brain health mean in late life for healthy aging, and what are the brain skills that are critical as well? So I just, again, glad to have the conversation and to collaborate here in the coming years together.
Thank you so much, Harris, and we'll take you up on that. But we'll stay on the line and we'll come back to you for the discussion. But also in the States, delighted to welcome Professor David Furman. And as you've heard this morning, the exposome and those wider determinants of health and the environment, so much that is beyond kind of healthcare, is absolutely fundamental to the mission as we look at healthy people, healthy planet. So David, could I introduce you? Welcome, and thank you for being so patient on the line.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. Just want to make sure that you hear me well.
Yep.
Okay, nice. Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn, and thanks, Tina, for this great invitation to be part of this huge effort. This has been in my agenda for 8 years almost. I'm a human immunologist by training and head up the Stanford 1000 Immunomes project at the Stanford School of Medicine. And recently moved to the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, which is the largest institute for aging research in the world, 35 miles north of San Francisco, to lead an AI platform to understand how systemic chronic inflammation leads to rates of aging in different organs and systems. So my large interest in the exposome, which, as you have mentioned, basically encompasses lifestyle, nutrition, environment, all the biological, social, physical, and chemical exposures during your life course will trigger changes at the systemic chronic inflammation level, and how those are determining rates of aging in the cardiovascular system, in the brain, in other physical parts of the body. So that's one research, part of our research that that's been on my agenda for about 8 to 10 years, to really understand what are these social determinants or exposome determinants of systemic chronic inflammation, and how could we, one, better understand the contribution of each one of these, right? So is it sleep more important than chronic stress? Is it gluten more inflammatory than the pollutants that I'm breathing in the air? We have no clue. So there's a need to study this in more depth. My vision here is that we need more research. There's very little understanding about the contribution of the exposome to the QALY and the WALY for those last 50 years of life that we have in this planet. So we do know that there's genes that enable everybody here in this room and myself to live 100 years or 120 years. There's been cases that's the case, right? Yet we die of chronic disease at the age of 80, 89, 90. So there's at least 35 years that are lost. And probably more importantly, the QALY and the WALY during those 50 years of life, which are largely dependent of our own exposome. So I'm very excited about this discussion of this session, and hopefully I can contribute to a large extent, and also very happy to be part of the paper that we just published in The Lancet.
Thank you, David. Absolutely brilliant. And I think that what David sort of described there is really what is different about this mission in terms of bringing together the healthy people, healthy planet. And as David said, we know we should know more about sleep, the impact on everyday lifestyle, from nutrition, etc. It's the questions that people ask. It's actually what the average person in the street wants to know. How much sleep do I have? What do I do about it? And that's the opportunity here to create the UK as a really world-class living lab that we can drive that with people co-involved in innovating. So thanks, David, and we'll come back to you on the exposome. But questions from the audience and questions coming through online. Lynn, you have a question to kick us off.
Yeah, do you want a mic or shall I project?
Mike.
It's mainly for David, but the exposome is something I'm extremely interested in. But it's not just external factors. We are also exposed to our own microbiome, which changes throughout our lives. So how do we account for that? We know that diet and various exercise impact on the microbiome. How are you taking that into account in terms of its impact on inflammation and all the other health indicators?
Excellent question, David. Over to you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful take. There are well-known differences between the external and the internal exposome, and I think they're highly interconnected, right? If we are exposed to a diet that is high in soluble fiber, we will likely have a very diverse microbiome. And we have shown that after the age of 60, the diversity of the microbiome is negatively correlated with the systemic chronic inflammation in the body. So the more diverse a microbiome, the lower your systemic chronic inflammation and the better your health outcomes. So there are interconnectivities there, but there's also the genetic susceptibility, right? How we process, how we interact, our cells in the gut will interact with the microbiome is particular to each one of them, to each one of us. So the type of metabolites that we produce in response to that microbiome, that's what that's referred as to internal exposome, right? We can measure those things. We can take a blood sample and measure 3,500 metabolites and have an idea of what your microbiome is telling us. So again, it goes back to having more research and funding more research into the space, because we know extremely little about how the microbiome impacts at the genetic level and individual susceptibility to developing chronic disease due to systemic chronic inflammation. I hope that helps.
Richard,
so can I add to that very quickly? Sorry. It's a great question. The microbiome does change throughout the life course, and it also changes based on location. The microbiome here in London is going to be different to Glasgow or Scotland or different countries. Depends on our diet. Are we vegetarian, vegan, and so on? So there's many different variables that we have to take into account across the life course again. And in considering just one aspect of the internal exposome, the microbiome, is going to throw up so much data. There's so many microbes there, so many different patterns, so many dietary, lifestyle interactions. It's how we handle the data as well. We're collecting a lot of data as consumers. We're giving our data to the supermarkets or to the insurance companies and so on, or giving our data to the government, the COVID data or our symptom data. One example is the Zoe app, developed here at King's, where the government and also industry and technologies benefited from the data. So what are we doing about data handling? Considerations, we need new technologies, and also considering what is the value of that data to different stakeholders. So when we consider the exposome, internal or external, we need better data analytics. And why should we collect the data? Because it's valuable. to myself and to other stakeholders as well. So these are just more considerations. So.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask some more questions from the floor, but just a question that's come through about, you know, we talked about this being a living lab and a test bed, but what's really new about this mission and what can we do practically to kind of, you know, take these actions forward?
Thank you. First, I guess Richard said very well, and obviously David as well, what it's there. So there's a lot of unknowns, but we also start understanding there are some innovations that are helping us to, let me say, start tackling these unknowns. The first one, we never talk about, it's computing capability. We didn't have the capacity of computers that we have today, literally 10 years ago. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, you always think about the software somewhere, but the hardware that allow us to process the data we couldn't do before. So some of the answers that David and Richard are looking in their research, it's going to take a lot of time, but we start seeing some of, first of all, foundational elements that will allow us to move forward. And we still don't know if quantum, which a discussion we have several times about, as a computing, not as a physical status, will help us solve this equation. Because the producers of quantum computers, Google, IBM right now, they see a potential, but still we don't know if they were capable to answer the question we're asking these computers. That's the first thing. The second is the availability of data and the way, the techniques that we are improving to understand this data. So what we need from data is just to give a meaning to this data. And giving the meaning of this data is a combination of factors that Richard says so well. What's the importance of the exposome that we have put as a foundational element of the mission? So you see our perspective is there. It's not a silos narrowing one point, but just overlooking the whole dimension. And it's how you give a meaning to this data with a purpose, understanding the complexity that's behind, which is also cultural. We can't have a right diet for longevity if you're from an Indian background or if you're an Italian background like I am, because we have cultural foundation in our approach, also genetic, obviously, which are different from others. So start also understanding the diversity of the cultures is a way on how we are approaching health, which is not a whole. We discussed about women before. We just literally learned that women are different from men, I don't know, 7 years ago, probably heavily in research, because the data set, as you know well, are typically coming from male, white male, Western white male in general. So most of the drugs are developed that way. Most of the research is based on those samples. And we must be aware of that. Therefore, if we don't have people like David or Richard that are helping us to look the perspective from a broader angle, we will never be able to move that forward. Finally, the test beds. The test beds is here. It's in the cities. So we're doing a lot of work with at the UK, the National Innovation Center for Aging, try to show that cities are not, for example, a dead passive entity where you just deploy services for older adults by adding a ramp or a rail, because then they're more obviously accessible for older people. Cities are active. Cities are around us. When you take a bus, you're just making a behavioral lifestyle choice. But what that bus can teach you, or we heard this morning about using electrical bikes, or when you go, unfortunately, we don't have the example anymore of the donut, but if a donut has a 50% calories less, it helps. If you go to Tesco, you could be taught about what it could be a better diet based on your origin and your lifestyles. So there's a lot of many touch points around us. A museum provides a lot of factors that I really would like to measure better in the overall exposome, let me say, as an outcome. How we can maximize the type of interaction that we have every day in our life to help us living healthier, longer lives. Can cities become proactive? I'm literally going to Barcelona tomorrow at the Smart City Summit to talk about this concept with the Newcastle and other cities. We're bringing forward the transforming cities in a sort of a live thing that can literally help with the choices. But if we don't have the data and if we don't weigh and KPIs to measure what are the outcome, we will very with many issues, we won't be able to understand if it's good or bad for us. Therefore, there's a lot of fast testing about our reactions to changes. When we talk about, for example, the glycans, there's a lot of research. There are cells that are helping us to understand more quickly if there's an impact over your health. Can we use that as a fast testing or epigenetic testing through saliva? So you don't even need the blood samples anymore to understand if something is happening. And you can deliver it through pharmacies, for example, and create a sort of a joint approach with the citizens, with us as a public, to start providing meaningful data back to David and Richard, and then understand more about the complexity around us, which is what we think could really make a change, and it's the foundation of the mission.
Harris here from Egypt. I have a piggyback comment, if that's okay.
Of course, go ahead.
Brilliant. I think there's also a great opportunity with this mission to look at healthy aging in all policies, which I think is very much aligned with your interests. But I think if we can really forensically look across sectors of society and think about healthy aging relevant to that, and there's science that needs to be done in these areas, but there's also potential policy fine-tuning that can be done now or in the next 12 months. And one area that I think is interesting that hasn't been touched on, at least in this session, is digital literacy of older adults. And we know what bad aging looks like with digital literacy. It means being disconnected from digital engagement. It means being manipulated by mis and disinformation. It means cybercrime. So what would the alternative look like? What does good healthy aging look like on the internet? It looks like connection. It looks like being able to effectively navigate the digital environment safely and coherently understanding what's good, solid information and what's misleading. So, just some comments from me.
Excellent. Thank you, Harris. We've got a comment and a question from the room.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the panel. Lucia from Ed Health, where we work with healthcare providers to use their data to come up with effective solutions. And really, I'm quite interested in the practicalities of the innovation that you've mentioned and has been talked about today. So really, my question is, we're faced with a huge problem in the UK of dealing with trying to implement solutions for addressing inequalities, longevity, but at the same time, we're dealing with an unprecedented demand, which is placed by people getting older and aging. So the health system is struggling with this, trying to be proactive, but needing to be reactive, which has been mentioned a few times today. So really, are there some practical solutions, some practical steps that can be measured now, that can be costed, to push this forward and making sure that this innovation does happen, that, is measurable?
Who wants to take that? Richard, do you want to take that?
Great question. Innovation is clearly central. That's why we're here. We're all interested in learning new things about our own longevity trajectory. How can we put this in place across the population? Innovation also requires funding. Okay, it comes down to, is there going to be resource put towards these innovations? There are many ideas that often do not get off the ground because of limited funding. So who are the stakeholders? The government, investors, large corporates, the consumer goods industry. One way in which we are integrating with consumer goods is to invite them into our academic environment, not only to fund research, but to do side-by-side research. At King's, we have a Unilever Bioscience Innovation Hub. So we're inviting Unilever with their ice creams and washing liquid and Marmite and so on to come and address these questions together with the academic scientists across the board. So it's awareness that innovation tends to happen within academia, or academics here, but also with industry partners. So I think Innovate UK, for example, is doing a great job to foster these kind of relationships between academia, industry. It has to be across borders as well. It shouldn't be just UK-centric. we've got partners or geographic partners in Europe or globally as a global village now. What can we learn from other societies? So Nick quite rightly said culture. And across the world, it's not one size fits all. And to build the bridges, not to Europe, but between the North and South. I mean, we heard this morning about a North-South divide in, health inequalities. We all know it exists. How can we be innovative to bridge that? So, for example, we are now partnering with the National Centre in Newcastle. We're in the North, we're in the South. What can we learn from each other? How can we bridge that gap? So that's also another aspect of innovation.
Yeah, and if I may add one thing is the fact that I think it's time also that we heavily found all together a new narrative. I think one of the purpose of the mission is just to use new words. And one word, I think, I guess, for everyone who's here since the beginning of the session, it is probably we would like to talk a little less about older people. We would like to talk about through the generation, because it's clear that if we don't start understanding what is happening to us in the beginning of our life, along our life, after in our life, it's impossible then to literally leverage a mission of longevity, because it starts when it starts, but it goes through all the life course. That's why, yes, we are the National Innovation Center for Aging, but we're also working with primary schools. Because if you don't go there and start discussing about what is a diet, educating about the basic principles that then someone in a school can bring home and in their cultural heritage, try to transform it in something proper that could have a meaning through the journey, well, it will be impossible to achieve this mission. So I think the narrative that I guess you all will bring back home from this session will also to be, yes, it's longevity, and that's what we talk about, healthy life expectancy, right? Formally, we define it this way, but it's life expectancy, not its later life expectancy. Okay, so it happens all over the process. And back again, the research that is going on, it starts allowing to see that if we see from this perspective, yes, that then we can make the change that we hope we really can drive from here.
Yeah, absolutely excellent. I also wanted to I'm going to go to the lady in the room, but I also wanted to ask David a link to that in terms of what is the opportunity to do that, to think differently about how we can bring in this concept of the exposome, and how can we measure it, given that it's so central to the mission?
Yeah, really important topic here, and it was talked about education quite a few times in this discussion, and the idea of the one-size-fits-all approach. In my view, if we were to promote funding for research, there are two major ways or angles to the same question of the stop the trigger of these social determinants of SCR, systemic chronic inflammation. One is a must-have, which is the one-size-fits-all, which all we know, it's about education, it's about mild exercise, healthy diet, protection from pesticides and pollutants. But there's also a fine-tuning of this idea of stop the trigger. We're genetically diverse, and what may be good for me, and so say broccoli, it could be better for me than fish. Maybe gluten is more inflammatory for Tina than it is for me. So there are more studies needed to be able to address this more individual level exposome and how that exposome interacts with our own genetics and produces systemic chronic inflammation. The other thing that I think is very important, aside from education, is that the idea of stopping the trigger is highly political, right? We are not well prepared to keep a healthy lifestyle. Exercising for the sake of exercising is not natural to us. We have not evolved thinking, oh, I have to run 20 minutes today to keep my heart healthy. We have not evolved thinking that way. So there is a need of policy in place saying, for example, that we could subsidize fruits and vegetables while banning inflammatory and toxic processed foods. And that's highly political. So in my opinion, aside from this, which is a very important topic, the must-have, which is the one-size-fits-all, versus the nice-to-have, which is the fine-tuning of that personalized response to exposome also comes down to how individuals respond to triggers for behavioral change. Okay, so psychology and psychiatry have largely failed us, right? We are experiencing a global pandemic of obesity and inflammatory conditions that are largely preventable, right? Despite this lack of genetic preparedness that I mentioned to behavioral change, many people, even in the very low socioeconomic status, can achieve effectively a healthy lifestyle. So what is it in those individuals that is triggering that behavioral change? We also need studies to deal with that diversity and be able to say, okay, at the individual level, there are using computational psychiatry and AI tools, particular triggers, right, that could help me, that may be different from those than can help my wife, who's French. So for example, she could have a very strong attachment to croissant, because on Saturday morning, the little smile of the croissant was given to everybody in the family, and she has that embedded in her, very, very into her brain. And so I think it's important to decouple the one-size-fits-all, which is a must-have, and there's much education needed and also studies needed there, and be able to decouple that from the nice to have, which is more of a fine-tuning exposome and how we respond to those exposome triggers in terms of systemic chronic inflammation and aging.
I really like, just very quickly, David, what you say about the political impact. So if you go and check out the WHO determinants of health and look at the social determinants of health, one of the factors that help us living longer is driving policies. Fasten or not fasten seatbelt changed the longevity of people. Just to mention something, as David was saying, that has been decided in the level. Have you ever associated that to longevity? Probably not, but it's one of the determinants of health. The other one about behaviors, I think it's so important. At the center, we're just building a behavioral bank, analyzing data about what's your day in the life. Therefore, you know what's happening along your life journey in a day. And therefore, you can, with machine learning, can start understanding what could be the next steps, and therefore, where to make intervention, where suggest a behavioral change, because that's the kind of data that sometimes we forgot are important to us, and it could be our consumer, for example, habits. And if you know you have a sequence that starts with the croissant in the morning on the Saturday, then therefore you have actions that could follow on if that's something that you can change as a behavior. I'm sorry.
I have a piggyback comment if you would allow me, Lynn, but otherwise I can hold it.
Yeah.
Well, I like Nick's point about policy engagement, and David made the point as well. You know, how do we infuse this longevity into policy discussions and sort of socioeconomic cutting edge kind of dynamics? And
Was it that comment?
We lost you, Harris.
Harris, we lost you.
We'll come back. Yeah, we'll come. Harris, we're going to take 2 questions from the floor.
okay, I came back, but let's go to the next one. I really apologize for this bad internet.
So it wasn't really a question, it was more maybe following on from what this lady was saying, at a real clinical level, how applicable, how useful is this data? And for me, where I'm talking to women, we're offering them nutrigenomics testing and lifestyle assessments and blood testing. It's actually really hard to kind of make that correlation, and that's the reality of it. It's very hard to then advise that woman meaningfully, because you have to be mindful of her budget and her lifestyle. But I think what we forget here, because it's such a hotbed of incredible brains, is that actually the everyday person has no idea about any of this. So any inroads are going to be amazing.
Yeah, we never forget that, but that's a great point. Is another question just here? I'll take 2 more questions. Yeah, 2 more questions.
Thank you. And yeah, you're absolutely spot on about the fact that most people have no idea. And this is what I'm seeing. I'm a school governor as well, and we know that about a quarter of families with children currently are having food insecurity issues. We know the issue of the pandemic has impacted on mental health for children, for adults, and there are going to be huge knock-on effects for this. How do we take that into account in the education that we give to people and in the way that we provide outreach to organisations and individuals?
Hi all, thank you so much for a great panel, and I agree with everyone. I'm Iriana Prokic, the founder of Hunger, and one thing that comes to mind when we speak about one size fits all is obviously not the case. This new trend of very famous people who are influencing those people who are people who are not really sitting in this kind of conferences and talking about all these issues, and they're only looking up to those celebrities. And that new trend of rise up and grind and short your sleep because you have to be more productive, you have to just show off that you are doing so well, and then all this new wave of young people are actually following without understanding how much damaging that is for their lives, and also how that impacts the economy overall. And also those people at the end of the day, because everything is a loop, who are promoting all of this, how can they be stopped, really?
So that's a mission in itself. Nick, can I give you the question about that through life course and the need for education and listening to families?
I'd rather start from the last one. I think we should have to put TikTok as one of the determinants of health, or it's obvious we have to do it. The point is that we're so slow and late in our way of thinking that we're not doing it. That's why the mission is here. We have to look at what is happening in reality to us. And we can't say that TikTok being not, let me say, an academic source of data is not valid like the others. And obviously Harris can comment here far better than me. But what's the influence of those behaviors in the longevity and the health of people? Health, okay? Yes, people at the center. You're absolutely right. But that's what Lynn said this morning. You were there. When she said about democratizing the approach, is exactly this way. Now, democratize is a quite complex word, obviously, because you could see from many perspectives. It's education, it's the language, it's political, it's the economy. So you should have to see from those perspectives. But those perspectives are all relevant, and that's why we need this vision. Again, someone could say in the room the classic sentence the American says, oh, you're trying to boil the ocean. Yes, that's the answer. Why not?
But also, just one comment here, a quick comment on what was just mentioned. We all agree that the social media network and all these exposed factors will be very detrimental for our health. Now, again, we have to prioritize, right? Policymakers need to prioritize, and it's on our side to give them and guide them towards understanding what is more important, what is causing more inflammation, what is causing more quality lost and aging in accelerated fashion. And I think that's where we need more studies to address these questions.
So can I come in very quickly? We talk about education. Who really needs to be educated? The consumer, but also the policymaker, the parliamentarian. We've learned a lot through the pandemic. The parliamentarians were educated about, vaccine technology and so on. Where does it make a difference? The economic status of the NHS, for example. This was bounded around doing Brexit. How much are we going to save for the NHS if we are exiting Europe? Now, how much are we going to save for the NHS if we think about longevity and healthy longevity? It's these kind of hard-hitting statements that we need to make. It's not a pandemic, or is it a pandemic? Maybe we are in a stretched out pandemic because we're all getting gradually more unhealthy and not thinking about longevity. The pandemic isn't that we're shortening the lifespan, but we're getting more unhealthy into older age. And therefore, it's much more of a healthcare burden. And if we deliver this message to the policymakers in industry, government, and also the consumer, I think we're starting to make a difference. So.
I think that's why it's a mission. That transformative change and the need for that partnership and collaboration to come together. But one thing we are adamant about this mission is that it is about action. And I think that has come through very, very strongly through all of the presentations today. But out of time for now, but this is the start. This is a launch. And so the best is yet to come in terms of the action that follows. But I would like to thank the panelists, Richard Chow, Nick Palmarini, and online, Harris Air. Thank you for sticking with us, Harris, throughout the Wi-Fi problems. And David Furman, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So I'm just going to say a few words because I know it's quite hot in this room and you've been incredibly patient to last the course. I think most of you have actually lasted the course for the 3 hours. So I'm just going to do a very, very brief summing up. So I think it was quite fun, and I hope you've all received your copy of the Lancet article, because that's obviously putting together the scientific context, the framework for all the thinking around the exposome. And we had a lot of questions from the editor actually about quantum. They're like, why are you calling it quantum? And we tried to explain this is about, you know, a quantum leap forward and it's not actually about the science technology, because boy, it is exploding and at an accelerating rate. Is that the quantum in technology and science is here. We need a quantum leap forward in how we're thinking and how we're doing things. So that is really where we're at, and this is very much the point of actually coming together today. Now we know we talked about we often talk about healthcare. What we're talking, and we've got health 1.0 at the moment. We need to get that to health 3.0, and we need to think totally radically and different. This is not about healthcare. This is about health. And so we know, for example, that poor quality work, crap jobs, that is a hugely important determinant for a lot of the poor health that we have today. So that is clearly a massive area for attention, which actually the Business for Health and working with the CBI are very much on the case with. We talked a lot about health equity. So Sir Michael talked about that. We know that has to be cracked. There is no way we can have economic prosperity and economic growth without a healthy population, and we cannot have a healthy population until we deal with some of these wider systemic inequalities. It is absolutely clear, and all the data that we're talking about, it is already showing us that to be the case. That is the burning platform coming out of this pandemic. We've talked a lot about yes, the need for activism. Well, I know loads of activists out there, but we need to be heard. We need to pull together and have a collective force behind us. And I think, and we talked, we've talked a bit about we need fewer standards, fewer frameworks, more standards. There's a whole technological aspect to this. But actually, we talked about the campaigns. It needs to become a, hit the wider sort of consciousness, and the politicians need to be hearing us. And you're absolutely right. The policymakers, the business leaders, the parliamentarians, the people who have a lot of the influence and the power, they have to be educated, and they have to be up for the journey and the ride as well, because it's going to cause a lot of pain and upset. And that's always the case when there's disruption. It will affect those in positions of power and influence the most. So that's the biggest challenge. And I think finally, the culture, the mindset, education is key to this. Young people is absolutely key to this, but it behoves all of us to kind of, do our bit, because it's only going to happen if we do our bit. And we have to start becoming a little bit more challenging of the status quo. We know that the NHS and care system cannot be the solution, yet we still talk about that in the press like that. So the media really have to listen, and they really have to do their bit. I'll just finish. We talked a lot, and I think, Richard, you meant citizens, consumers, and communities. We all have to pull together. It is a multi-level effort. Listen, we've tried to kind of pitch our case for why a mission is really important. Obviously, it will only happen if all of us kind of club together and do it. So that's going to be the next stage. So join us and help us, and we will support you, because there's so many fantastic ideas, innovations, entrepreneurs, pioneers, scientists out there, and they just need the support. And we need to create an enabling environment, which is really what this mission is about from a technological, scientific point of view, but actually it's about breaking down those silos and those mindsets which are preventing the change. So anyway, we'll stop there, but thank you so much for coming and for being part of this, and we're really, really grateful. Yeah.
Before we end, I'd just like to also thank Tina, of course, Lynn and Nick for putting together this event.
And thanks, Richard, for hosting us.
And don't forget, we're part of Longevity Week 2022. There's a whole week of events, and we finish on Friday with another event here at King's. So do look at the Longevity Week program, and you're welcome back on Friday. Data-driven longevity.